Hi. Um, so, here to talk about quantum computing with whoever wants to chat, add some speakers, and see what's on people's minds. Kumar, what's up?
Hello. Haven't really been in spaces quite as much. Recently saw your Mu Deng short, and
Which sort?
the Mu Deng short.
I don't know what short?
Mu Deng?
I don't know what that is.
What?
What ticker is that? Is it a stock?
No, that's crypto.
It's crypto. I'm only short Fartcoin.
Oh, didn't didn't you say didn't you say you don't like the animal memes? I guess I must
I
have
don't,
mistaken it with
yeah,
Farcoin
I
actually.
don't even know what
Yeah.
that is. I mean, I don't think any meme coins are worth anything, but we're here to talk about quantum computing.
I rest my case. Just wanted to talk about Mu
Do you,
Deng,
do you
but
see the
now I know
title
it's.
of the chat?
I do.
Okay,
I'll
are you
leave.
stupid? Hello.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
Hey, Shkreli. How you doing, man?
Good.
Yeah, I appreciate you getting me on speaker here. So, I trade for a hedge fund,
Yeah.
and we have quantum guys here. They every month they do some sort of research and presentation, and seems as though quantum is coming up quite quickly. We might be 5 to 10 years out from an everyday quantum computer on people's desks, but definitely not 15 or 30 out.
Yeah. How'd you come up
Um,
with that conclusion?
well, first off, one sec. Sorry, my daughter here. Didn't expect to get on the mic. Um, okay, so, anyways, quantum is currently being used, right? We have
Is it?
we do. We have many
Is it? Well,
companies
hold on.
currently
Who's
currently
it being
using
used
quantum.
by? Because I write a lot of code in quantum, and I don't see what you're being
IBM
used.
has 270 customers. They've deployed 70
Right. So
computers,
I'm a customer.
right?
I'm a customer of IBM. I've posted
Okay,
code.
perfect.
I've posted code. There's
Right.
absolutely nothing you can use these machines to do.
Not okay. Well, maybe you not personally, but
Well, you tell me what can you use these machines to
use
do?
cases are currently being used by
Like what?
DARPA.
Like
DARPA is
what?
currently using it. The
Like what?
IDF, Israeli Defense Forces,
So
are currently
I
using
know how to
quantum.
use these machines. I literally write code to use quantum computers. You tell me what you can use it for.
What
Because
code do you write for quantum?
I wrote integer factorization code. I wrote an implementation of Shor's algorithm. My girlfriend was uh, an expert in the space. There's nothing you can use these machines for.
What you're saying is, as companies are currently using them, literally as we speak, you're
Yeah,
saying there's no use
I'm
case.
literally one of those.
Yeah, but you're not. You're not.
Well,
You're Martin Shkreli. You're not a multi-billion-dollar company.
I'm a cloud customer of IBM's and AWS's for quantum, and I'm telling you that you cannot use the
What are you
machine.
doing? What do you?
You can barely
If
use
you don't mind me
them.
asking, what are you doing with quantum right now? What are you studying?
You can barely use it to do anything. I want to
Okay, but
I want to do integer factorization. It's encryption, decryption, and
okay, right.
you can't use them. They don't do anything.
So these companies right now are transitioning from hardware to
No,
software for that specific reason, so that there can be a full circle, so that you
there's
put
just
in an input and
there's no
you won't.
practical thing you can do with it.
Okay, so what you're saying, Martin, is you believe that in the future, for someone to use a quantum computer, they'll have to be a quantum expert.
No,
Is that what you believe?
that's not even close to what I said.
Okay,
I'm
so
saying
so that's what's happening right now. Is software is being built. The transition from hardware to software is being built so that there is a full scope. As a human, you'll be
software.
able to put in what you're requesting, and the computer will be able to spit it out for you in a
That would
form that will be able to be in
that would
data that
be
will be
great.
able to be taken and exported.
That would be.
So that's happening right now. So at
When you
CES,
say happening right now, what do you mean? Because I don't know of one person who's
so
made
every
any.
major quantum player right now is transitioning from the hardware side of things to the software side of
Oh,
things
hold
for
on, hold on,
scalability.
hold on. Stop right there. So the biggest chip we have on cloud right now is IBM's 150 or so qubit machine, right?
Right.
Right. The biggest number you can factor with that is 2 trillion, which is
Okay.
a very, very small number. It's like a 9, what is it, a 13-bit number or something. And, we need to be able to factor a lot more than that if we're going to do factorization. Factorization is like the first thing anybody can do with quantum. That, the whole point of Shor's algorithm is that you can use quantum to factor a large number more easily in a complexity time that's faster than
Right.
with a regular computer. Otherwise, we just use regular computers. There's no point in using a quantum computer unless you can change the complexity class of a problem. And we just don't have any quantum computers right now that can be useful in that regard. Now, people are researching them because one day we might have that. And like, for example, in my case, I'm willing to spend $10-20 million on quantum computing for various, you can imagine what, encryption, decryption purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I spent thousands of dollars on it, and they're just not satisfactory.
Yeah.
I've spent millions of dollars on GPUs, on EC2, things like that, and AWS EC2 versus AWS Bracket, which offers the quantum computers, which none of them are online right now, by the way, like Rigetti or IonQ, they're all offline for some reason, because it's very hard to maintain these systems. So it's just something that we had a hard time factoring even 6-digit numbers. The machines just break; they don't work. I mean, IBM's QuizKit is the leading software, and QuizKit's made a huge number of breaking changes that makes it very hard to use. So it's just a really early space. I mean, there's nothing that is that exciting. And if you can use these machines to do, for example, something like Shor's on a very big number, there could be some espionage or code cracking that you could do. But it remains to be seen that that's even a big market itself. Outside of that, I don't see any industrial use, to be honest. People talk about simulating, like for pharmaceuticals, which is I happen to be an expert in. It's been 20 years in pharmaceuticals. There's not really a great advantage there. Protein modeling and ligand docking is sort of fine the way it is. Like you're not going to really, it's not a must-have thing, and we're so far away from that given how far we are from even doing integer factorization. Like being able to actually simulate matter is something that's like just like literally a dream. Like there's just no even, we're not even an inch close to that. So to me, this is just a huge bubble. I mean, I don't if there was a company that published anything where they said this helped me, I'd be really interested and excited if you could find one company that said this helped me and this is why.
Hyundai, 32 million data points they brought down to 8 using quantum computer, and then they were able to improve their lithium battery by 70%. So
Okay,
like,
so I don't believe
well,
it.
okay,
I don't believe it.
so that's fine. Like we don't have to debate the
No.
semantics.
So I think it's important to figure out the truth here. So the reason I don't believe it, again, is because there's no quantum computer that can actually do a calculation of any kind. So do you know what vendor they had? Hyundai.
Believe it was Microsoft. They work with Microsoft
Microsoft doesn't have a
and
quantum computer.
Quantinium.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Quantinium is an interesting player. They're Honeywell sort of spin out. They're privately held. They want to do an IPO. It's up there, I'd say, with a Google and an IBM, and far above any of the currently publicly traded ones. But Quantinium's, there's not much information given they are one, private, two, they've sort of reconfigured their company with a merger recently. Honeywell kind of wants to get out of it, it sort of seems. And I'd love to read more, and I'll do some more research into this customer testimonial. But what I've seen from a lot of these quantum companies is they're desperate for the customers to give any testimonial they can so that they can kind of have a like public perception of it being useful. But in the actual field, you know, outside of the investor relations bullshit, like I haven't heard of anyone in finance or pharma that said this stuff is useful. And materials research is very similar to pharma. And I don't see where or how you could sort of get there that you couldn't get there in a traditional compute sense that isn't very sort of cumbersome and difficult and, you know, kind of irrelevant to do. So I think that if they published on this, that'd be interesting. As far as I know, Quantinuum doesn't have anything special that isn't out there from any of the other companies. And Google has no cloud, but IBM has a cloud, and it has not been a material business for them. And you know, from what I understand, I mean, you cannot really load, for example, large amounts of information onto quantum. You couldn't do 32 million data points of anything on any quantum machine right now because there's no way to set that data. These machines have 100 bits. Like when I do the integer factorization, I'm manually setting each bit, and I have to segregate the ancilla bits from the storage bits and just have to manually tinker with each bit. So you can't do 32 million anything. There's just no bits to do it with.
Yeah. So I understand your point of saying like quantum right now is not ready, but like the rate of acceleration is going to be much greater than AI as
The
quantum
rate,
starts to
well, the
solve
rate
their.
has been pretty bad so far because just we had 50 qubits. Like just take IonQ for a minute. Like 5 years ago, they had 9 qubits, and they're struggling. They got like 30 qubits now, and they're finally promising maybe they'll have 100 this year. So over 5 or 6 years, they've only 10x the qubits, which is kind of pathetic. So we don't know when we're going to have real size machines, but when we do have them, I don't know what the use case is other than encryption.
Yeah.
Encryption I'm excited about, but other than that, I don't see any industrial use case.
I don't think enough investment was going into quantum in the previous years, which has ramped up significantly the past 24 months and will ramp up
Well,
significantly now.
I would say the investment community had the exact opposite perception because too much money went into quantum and then nobody wanted to fund it anymore, which is what forced IonQ to have a down round and then go public via a SPAC. And then the same thing for D-Wave and the same thing for Rigetti. Nobody wanted to touch these in the private world. In fact, almost everyone thought D-Wave would be bankrupt. And they somehow made it out and survived. People thought Rigetti would be bankrupt. People thought IonQ was going to eventually go bankrupt. And even people at Google have told me that there's no real commercial opportunity for quantum. So
Right.
I feel like this is just a deception that's sort of been played on investors by investors. The quantum companies aren't even saying that quantum is exciting. Like, there's no quantum company actually jumping up and down saying
I don't
this
know.
is a
I don't
great
know about
story.
that. I definitely
Well,
don't
look at
know about
Rigetti.
that.
Rigetti did a call today, and Rigetti said at the Needham conference, Rigetti said this is all research phase. Nobody's using this commercially. Rigetti said that today.
Yeah,
So,
Rigetti's quant. Yeah, that's Rigetti. That's specific. But IonQ, they're using it. They're building data center computers right now. Like,
I don't think so.
but
I think
anyways,
that's all
like
a
I
lie.
understand. You're able to articulate it better than me, whereas I'm just a trader. But what as majority of people from the outside in, I definitely believe that the future is going to be CPU, GPU, and QPU. So like, I don't
For
think
what,
it's going to be
though?
standalone. I don't think it's going to be standalone quantum. I don't think it's going to be standalone GPU,
But for
CPU. I
what?
think it's
What
going to
app?
be a mixture.
What's it going to do?
Well, quantum is going to be able to do what GPUs and CPUs can't do with
What
zeros
can't
and
they do?
ones.
What can't they do?
Well, quantum is going to be able to figure out material science, physical science,
But I'm telling you, like
calculate chemicals,
when we simulate,
matter.
yeah, we can do that with things like DFT, density functional theory, and other, things like GROMACS. And I use GROMACS and Amber to simulate molecular dynamics, and I'm very satisfied. Like there isn't a huge need. And by the way, there's a company called Schrodinger. So if you're not familiar with these guys, ticker's SDGR, and they have been doing molecular dynamics simulation for 25 years. Guess how much revenue they have? 100 million. That's it. That's like literally these guys are the kings of molecular dynamics research. You can simulate reality using their machine. Maybe one day you could do it better with quantum, but right now, I mean, I would say that we're 15 to 30 years from integer factorization. Like molecular dynamics, I don't think, I'm not sure we could ever do that, because the amount of data points you need to shove in a quantum computer, you're going to need millions and millions of qubits, because it's very hard to store the state of a protein or a cell ensemble or whatever in and keep it in the quantum computer. I mean, it's conceivable, but it seems like it's going to be a long time from that. I think the sooner, the better application soon will be stuff that the NSA is going to want. You know, the NSA, people like that. And I think that there's sort of some questions there, because the NSA budget is only so big, and their compute budget I estimate to be around two billion roughly a year, and they store a lot of stuff. So they're not going to take their compute budget, throw it out the window, and say we're just going to change that to quantum. They're going to sort of, I think, add quantum to their compute budget. We don't know who they're going to use, right? They're not necessarily going to use Rigetti. They're not necessarily going to use IonQ. They probably use Google or IBM. You know, Rigetti and IonQ are like shit tier companies. IBM, I've actually enjoyed using their service, and it's a lot of fun. The Qiskit is my bigger problem. Qiskit is just real pain in the ass to work on. But after messing with IBM Quantum Cloud for the last few months, all I can say is that, like, it's really awesome that I could divide 77 into 11 and 7. It's like kind of spectacular that it works, because it's like a fundamentally different kind of computer, and that's so cool. But then after you get over that, you say, what the fuck am I going to do with this thing? I basically said, well, let me try to factor 99, or let me try to factor, I'm sorry, 97 is a prime, but the next number that was a little bigger. And eventually, you know, we weren't able to factor anything of consequence. And there are people that they're trying to factor 20, 48-bit numbers. We're trying to factor 20-bit numbers on a quantum computer, literally 100 times smaller, and the quantum computer is having trouble. Now, in 5 years, what will that look like? In 10 years, what will that look like? The problem with that question is who has the wherewithal to survive? You know, so IonQ has one principal customer, which is the Air Force. And almost all the revenue comes from this one contract they have. And I don't know who at this company got the Air Force to do this, but like that is part of like being, when you work with the government, you kind of have to pay a lot of people to get those contracts. A lot of people who used to maybe be in the Air Force, and you pay them as lobbyists or whatever.
Yeah, lobbyists sort of thing. Now, the one thing though I got to say though is like I understand where you're coming from, but it is a little bit of a dangerous rhetoric in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is because we have countries like China, for example, that are putting many billions of dollars into quantum research that we know of, probably many billions that we don't know, so that they don't set off any red flags. And we are vulnerable to quantum hack. And if there's a quantum hack, economically, that would be as devastating as a nuclear bomb. And we're just
I don't think so.
I 100%. What
So
if Martin?
I'm
You if
using
you get
quantum.
online, you can't access your internet. You can't start your car. You have no access
Well,
to
first of
to
all,
your crypto. You don't have that.
China recently it was revealed that they have root access to our telecom system.
Exactly. So what do you think they're going to do when they have
They
QC power? So what I'm trying to say is here,
they already
we need
have
to
everything. Don't
we
assume that. I mean, in security, everyone has what everyone
so
else
so
wants.
Martin,
So
let me finish the sentence.
it's
I
free
know.
flow of
Let me
information.
let me finish the sentence. So for me, what I'm saying is it's dangerous rhetoric. We need to be supporting quantum advancements. We need to be supporting it, especially PQC, post quantum cryptography. Super important. My favorite company, by the way, BTQ for that. But anyways, what I'm saying is we need to be very understanding that this is a risk. China and our adversaries know they're not going to be able to beat the
Well,
West with military. They know that. Okay? They're putting 16 billion last year in quantum computing research that we know of. Probably add another 30, 40 billion we don't.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah,
But
no, that's true because they know that
no,
that is
it's
the
not true.
only way. So Martin, they hacked into the U.S. Treasury Department. We don't
Yeah,
even know that if they're out. We don't even know if we're secure.
yeah. This is basic
And you're
security
telling
stuff.
me that they're not a threat once they have quantum supremacy, or if they
No,
get to
I don't.
quantum
I don't think
supremacy.
so. So
Please explain.
my interest in quantum is exactly this, specifically around cryptocurrency, and I'm really interested in being the first person to crack Bitcoin. And so I spent a lot of time. This is like my side hobby. I spent a lot of time thinking about different ways to do it, and ultimately one of the most interesting sort of ways to break ECC, other than, I mean, there's a lot of ways, but one of the more interesting ways is through quantum computing. And I want to be ready for every new expansion, every algorithm that shaves even a little bit of computational time. I'm excited about. So I will say this, like when the diplomat files were released for the cables in WikiLeaks, this is kind of what created WikiLeaks, it was a real nothing burger. And I think that we are 10 to 20 years away before we can decrypt RSA 2048. Now, I could be wrong, but this information is tradecraft for spies. It's really not anything else, because you can patch your system very quickly with RSA 4096, or you can make a PK, like you said, post-quantum, a PQC thing. Like NIST's already advanced a bunch of PQC algorithms. So like this isn't hard. Like even Bitcoin will shift immediately to a new thing.
Yeah.
Even Ethereum is planning to do that. So the actual risk here is information leakage. Thank you so much. And that information leakage is stuff that like people already know. So like when the cables came out, it wasn't that interesting because the cables were simply like just stuff we already knew, that like human spycraft and tradecraft and like trad hacking like already got all that. So like other than the identity of a spy, oh, we didn't know that this guy was a spy and turns out he was a spy, so maybe he'll be killed or arrested or something. But other than shit like that, like I don't know that there's a real practical cyber warfare that's that threatening or exciting.
So what you're
It could be
saying
that.
is best we just wait and see instead of being prepared.
No, we'll be prepared. NIST is prepared.
No, they're
NIST
not.
is
This is
already
not prepared. They just they
NIST is
change their
hold on.
standards
NIST
all the time. They just changed it again
NIST
2 months ago. NIST is not
NIST is
prepared.
working on
NIST
it.
is working with quantum companies to adjust their standards as we speak. So NIST is not
No,
prepared. Another thing I don't have that
hold
much
on one
time. So
second.
one more thing I gotta
Hold
say.
on.
I want everybody
Okay.
here to
If you don't
hear
have
this.
time, you don't have time. I have to. Hey, thank you. I have to go up my elevator, so give me a second. Sorry for anybody waiting.
Altitude going down.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? I'm glad to be joined by Yaroslav, my friend, who is a brilliant guy. And finally home. Sorry, it was a rough commute. What's up, Yaroslav?
Hello. This was a random.
Sorry, are you there? My connection maybe not so great.
Yo.
Hello.
By host. Oh, I was muted by host. I'm unmuted.
Oh
Okay,
shit, you
great.
guys
Can you
can
hear
hear
me?
me?
Yeah, what's up, Yaroslav? It's good to hear from you.
Great. Yeah, good to hear. I just opened my phone and it said Martin Shkreli is speaking, so I clicked this button and here I am.
Yo, this is
Hey
cool.
guys, can I just finish my thought and I'm out? Yaroslav, sorry to bother you.
No.
Okay.
You got a lot of time, brother.
Well,
So
I just want to say,
have
hey,
a good
Martin. So
night,
you
dude.
want to, Martin, you want to hear
No, dude,
yourself
you're
speak, but
done.
you don't want to hear anybody else.
You're not the only person here. There's 10 people here
Okay.
who want to talk.
I
You've been
love it
talking
when
forever.
Martin
Thank you.
speaks. Martin's the
Thank
man.
you. Thank you,
All right,
Martin.
Yaroslav.
Well, so I
You're,
had a question. Did you guys
yeah.
discuss Gil Kalai?
No, what's that?
Well, so basically, he's this person who points out why quantum computing might not actually work.
Oh,
So,
I know this. Yeah, I'm familiar with this. Yeah.
yeah, so to me, it's a little interesting. There's so much enthusiasm, and we still don't know whether the errors are correlated. Because if the quantum errors are correlated, then quantum computers, the cost scales exponentially. They're useless. And it's kind of interesting. We still don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, so my inclination is that it's not true, and that you can make useful machines. So I'm actually kind of bullish on that, and I love the idea of this. And you're like a computing genius, so you have a lot more insight on this kind of stuff. But to me, I would assume that is not true, and you can use these machines to do something. I think the bigger question, as somebody who's done a lot of
Oh shit! Hold
compute,
up.
like, what can you actually do with these boxes? And you have a lot of experience with GPUs, maybe amongst some of the top people in the world, in terms of deploying and using lots of GPUs. That's your thing. So when I play with quantum, the question becomes like, what are we going to use this for? Frank?
Yo, my bad. Hold on.
So yeah, that's kind of, have you paid any attention to the space outside of that, sort of theoretical question?
Well, I mean, there's factorial algorithms, but I'm kind of interested to see evidence that it's actually possible. And the last time we had quantum supremacy claims, very quickly they were contradicted. So I'm still
Yeah.
sort of on the fence. And when I see, can we actually use it for anything better than a classical computer? And after that, we can kind of go further. What else can we use it for?
Well, I think Shor proved that you got to speed up, and at least on paper. And so, to me, that's like the first place to start. Is you've got Shor's algorithm, and when you apply this, you can theoretically, as long as you can scale the qubits, which to your point is not 100% clear, you should be able to scale the qubits to get IFP to work. Now, the problem is, who cares about IFP? Ultimately, IFP has been here since Revest, Shamir, and Edelman, and it's had a good 50-year run. Did anybody expect RSA to never fall? Did anybody expect RSA would last 100 years or 200 years? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Eventually, we're going to find a way to crack RSA. To your point, the circuit sampling that, kind of experiments we've seen in the past, circuit sampling has been, kind of a contrived and pointless exercise that doesn't mean anything. So to me, that's why I've been on this journey of factoring, because if you can show me that you can factor numbers with this, at least I can point to a future. And I think I've been able to say that, we will see a day where quantum will break RSA. Now, the problem is, and then by extension, ECC or DLP, but the point is, who cares? We see this coming from a mile away. We can prepare for it, shift, and now what do you use a quantum computer for? And I think if you're trying to do molecular simulations and stuff like that, GPUs give you, or regular algorithms we have, give you a sufficient abstraction, and you could just use GPUs. I mean, Moore's law is not dead. We are getting a doubling in compute every year or two, and that, thanks to NVIDIA perhaps, and with that, you can actually simulate matter fairly well, at least for most material science concerns. Now, if you want to simulate, a 100-body problem or a million-body problem, that's a lot different. We can't do that right now. But abstractions get you there. I mean, Unity is an abstraction that gets you physics, right? So if you want pure physics, with no abstractions, that's the theoretical promise of quantum. But where do you need that? Where do I need to simulate every atom in a ball when I could just use Unity to simulate bouncing the ball?
Yeah, those are interesting questions. By the way, I gotta go to yoga. I'm going to Castro room, so I'm dropping off. But thanks for the letting me speak.
Yeah, thanks for popping in.
Hey, Martin, you mind if I jump in?
Yes, please.
Thanks for having me on, man. My name's Rich. First off, I want to thank you because I actually, did a bunch of reading on quantum computing. I actually work for AWS, so I'm,
Oh, nice.
somewhat in the space, a little bit technology space. invested a good amount, not a good amount, into Rigetti and IonQ, 10, 15K. And that I think when Rigetti was at like, 1 or something, just kind of
Great.
long shot, wanted it to be like 3% of my portfolio. Balloons to, 15% of my portfolio overnight. And I panicked and sold half of it. So I
Great.
appreciate it. I appreciate, all the insight. Question for you is, you do see these companies popping up, and you do see them, specifically IonQ, just winning a contract. I don't remember if it was the Navy or the Army
Yeah,
recently.
they have one customer,
Um,
which is the Air Force,
okay,
and the
gotcha.
Air Force just keeps doubling down on kind of quantum in general. And there will come a time, whether it's through Doge or somebody else, that they give up. Like if you look at the history of AI and DARPA, and sort of the government goes hot and cold on this type of stuff all the time. And right now, from the government, I'm saying, cool, I got these machines to a certain place. Who cares? Why is this something I should keep funding? And this is
Mhm.
what a lot of people really call winter. When AI had this winter, when Marvin Minsky, kind of the first winter is when he pointed out the XOR problem. Then there was another winter after the so-called export system problem. And then there was sort of a mini winter as well after that. And the point is, these winters come when government and industry say, why do we need this? And I think that we're facing down a winter here because in the past, the question was like, can you build a stable computer and get people to use it? And the answer is like, yeah, sure, I wrote a program. And now the question after that is now what's next? And unfortunately, these companies can't articulate why I need this over
Mhm.
the next 5 years for any customer. And when you have a problem like that, I think what ends up happening is the investors' money dries up and the customers' money dries up, and the companies have to find capital somewhere. And that's why the current companies like Rigetti and IonQ, these guys all wanted to stay private, but they had to do down rounds and they had to get bailed out by SPACs, and they were mostly just going to zero again until Willow came out. And Willow has nothing to do with these companies. So it's kind of funny to watch Willow kind of remind people that these companies even exist because they were left for dead before. None of these companies were growing revenue. There was all sort of a shit show. And IonQ is like the lone exception where they do have this Air Force contract that keeps either getting renewed or whatever, but eventually the Air Force is not going to want to keep renewing something that doesn't do anything. So
Mhm.
you have IBM and Google that are basically doing corporate philanthropy here. They acknowledge that there isn't actual business plan here for quantum computing other than it being futuristic and cool. So Honeywell was also interested in this stuff, and then Honeywell said, "We're not going to do this anymore. This sucks. There's no business here." And they basically threw out. Honeywell was one of the top companies in the space, and they basically quit. They spun out their business and they said, "We're done." And I think that the Google Willow announcement has gotten people excited for absolutely no reason because there's no actual use case for these systems at all, and the systems barely work as they are now. Again, I like the future. I invest in biotech my whole life. I love quantum computing, which is why I know anything about this space and care about it. But it's sort of a toy. Like I want to factor the biggest number possible, and I want to keep watching
Right.
as the progress gets better and better. But it's not something you can really create a business around, other than for hobbyists and enthusiasts.
Yeah, one of the reasons I sold is I actually assumed, based on all the articles I read, that one of the biggest industries would be pharmaceuticals, and drug discovery. And then when I saw you basically speaking out against it, I figured you knew what you were speaking about probably a lot better than most people. So that was one of the industries where I thought the kind of quantum computing had the most potential. But outside of that, I mean, do you think it's just basically encryption, cybersecurity?
Yeah, I like the encryption thing, and one of the really cool things is quantum communication, where again, so like I'm not just a hater of this space. Like I actually really interested in this space ever since I was a kid. The first company ever in the space was D-Wave, and so quantum communication is really cool because you have this Alice and Bob, uh, sort of sort of stereotype or conceit in computer science. And one of the problems is you have so many attacks of a communication channel between Alice and Bob. Quantum computing is the only way to guarantee that an eavesdropper cannot intercept the message between Alice and Bob, and you will actually be notified if there's an eavesdropper. So that's kind of a cool application, but again, very kind of far out there. In material science and pharmaceuticals, which is kind of like, adjacent to this, you want to be able to simulate, sort of like, think about this like Unity. If you've ever played a video game that had realistic physics, where, I don't know, you throw a ball or you throw something up in the air, maybe like Fortnite or a game like that, where if you throw something up in the air and then it drops, and it sort of looks realistic in terms of how it drops and how it shatters or how it bounces off something. That's an abstraction of the Newtonian physics that we deal with every day. On the quantum level, we have abstractions of that too. And so when we simulate pharmaceuticals, we do this with the best tools we have, some of which are freeware, like Amber and Gromax, some of which you pay for, like Schrodinger. I actually made a small competitor to Schrodinger. And one of the reasons we shut down that piece of software is that there were no customers. It's such a small space. Schrodinger sells only $100 million of this software, and it serves as this abstraction for both Newtonian and quantum physics. And so how much do these companies buy this software? Well, like I said, around $100 million worth. And if you improve that quality of the software 1,000x, which is what quantum might do someday, and for reasons I articulated, I don't think it's soon, because the actual bit space in these computers is really limited, and you need more bits to store the protein and drug ensembles. And it does throughput very difficultly, with a lot of difficulty. So that's sort of why Jensen said that the best problem here is sort of optimization and things like that, where you have a small amount of data that you're trying to find an answer for. In drugs, you can't have a lot of data. So in any event, I think that, if you 1,000x the efficiency of, say, Schrodinger's software, I don't think you would get a new customer. I think it would still be $100 million in revenue. So a lot of these companies have told me privately that the market here is vanishingly small, and most of what they're doing here is sort of this corporate science park, like a little like the old Bell Labs, where they're just sort of digging around and hoping to find something, but they're not businesses yet. And betting on this as a business is something that's very different from liking the science, which I hope it comes across that I adore the science. It's fascinating to use
Yeah, it does.
different parts of matter to do computation. And this is something the EAC founder, Beth Jesus, is doing too with thermodynamic computing. How do you exploit the universe to actually run your calculations? It's something that's really amazing. Alan Turing did this in the 40s, and he envisioned a way to solve Riemann sums using a device that he conjured. This is what he did before working on the first actual computer. He sort of designed one in his head that would exploit nature to create these calculations. So I think that there's something here. It's just a question of why these stocks and why now? Nothing's changed in this space at all in the last sort of 5 years, other than there's been less enthusiasm about it. And, that enthusiasm has changed, clearly, but nothing's actually changed in the fundamentals. If anything, the fundamentals have gotten a little bit worse in the sense that GPUs keep chugging along and quantum is just sort of struggling to do anything. For example, IonQ promises a 100-qubit computer by the end of the year. Well, IBM already has a 150-qubit computer online right now. So, why would you ever care about IonQ if IBM's computer's online? Rigetti doesn't have any fucking computers to speak of. So, there isn't a Rigetti computer online anywhere in the world right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. So based on our conversation, or just based on what I've seen in general, if we are, let's say, 10, 15 years out, even just to put it on the short side,
sure.
And you want to invest in quantum computing, it sounds like it would make more sense to go the IBM, Google route, considering that some of these companies might go bankrupt or they might whatever, and that it's going to take a larger company probably who has a lot of money to invest and essentially survive for however long it takes.
Well, I still think you have to think about why are you investing? Because to me, this is kind of like people have talked about like memristors or 3D printing or things like that. Like 3D printing is a cool technology, but the whole market is not even $1 billion. So there's no 3D printing company that's public and being successful. So you sort of sit there and say, why would I want to invest? even if it's 10 or 15 years away, what's my payoff? And it'd be one thing to say, for example, in biotech, like CRISPR has this big payoff day someday when CRISPR's, people can figure out how to use CRISPR to cure diseases. Well, that's a real payoff someday. That could actually happen. But quantum, like what is the payoff I'm getting? Like, is NSA going to buy a bunch of these boxes to decrypt, secret spy messages? That's the only realistic kind of outcome I could see. And if you take the market cap of all the currently traded public quantum stocks, and then you take the private ones, and then you make an adjustment for, say, Google or IBM, you're talking about the sector is trading at like hundreds of times of realistic potential revenue 20 years from now. So it's a fairly like obvious bubble. And of course, I have a vested interest. I'm short all these stocks, and I think they're all going to blow up. But I also, like when I did this with AMC and some other stocks like Sava, I just kind of also perversely feel bad for people that own the stocks. And I understand that like most of them just want to gamble and have fun and like buy a stock that could potentially go up, 10x or 5x or whatever. And some of the stocks did do that and then go back down, and some of them just go down. And people try to invent reasons, like AMC people were constantly trying to invent reasons that they were bullish on AMC, and they ended up reaching a point where they were just inventing conspiracy theories to explain why AMC failed. And quantum is going to be the same way. There's no revenue growth for quantum that's going to take place where IonQ is going to have 400 million in revenue or a billion in revenue, because nobody wants to sit there and factor numbers. Like, I'm the only nerd that thinks this is cool. And I think they kind of beg other companies to use these boxes and say, don't you want to stay ahead of the curve when quantum is ready 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years from now? And occasionally they'll get a Merck or a Daimler or Toyota to say, okay, we'll try it. We'll pay you 100 grand and we'll try it. But nobody's actually paid millions of dollars to use quantum other than the government, who feels like, okay, well, if this can break encryption, we should sort of stay on top of this. But even government's going to give up here, I think, because there's post-quantum encryption that you could just swap out. And it's like, okay, if you're using a wooden lock and key, all right, we're going to upgrade to a steel lock and key. And instead, people are like, no, let's research the wooden lock and key. It's like, why? It doesn't work. Let's just move on to the next thing. Oh, hi, what's up?
Yeah. So
Cool. Thanks, man.
yeah.
Sorry, hey Martin, just a quick question. Like these companies that you shorted, they're burning through cash so fast. I mean, they're going to be done in 2 years. So what are people seeing in them? They think that they can figure it out in 2 years?
Well, I mean, at this rate, all these companies can raise as much money as they want. And D-Wave, which is like the most egregious, shitty company, they were, like I said, the earliest quantum company. They don't even do quantum gates. They're just quantum annealing company. The revenue is actually down year over year, which for a futuristic growth stock isn't very good. And the Rigetti guy was very clear today at the Needham conference. He was like, don't think of us as a revenue generating company. Don't think of us as a company that's trying to grow sales. We're a company that is trying to achieve technical milestones. And that's the right way to think of it. I think the only bull case you could articulate for quantum is as follows. We don't know what these computers will be useful for, but one day they might be useful. And I see Gavin's in here, who's kind of an expert on this field, and I'd love to have him up. Because there are certainly people that are smarter about this than I am. But certainly, trying to intersect the science and the business, I do think I have a good handle on this. But there's a theory that, okay, well, look, we didn't exactly know what GPUs would be useful for. We started out doing shaders and having these numbers in these sort of natural matrix forms was very useful for creating pixels on a screen, and they were really great at graphics. And then all of a sudden, wow, what do you know? That this parallels really well, and you can staple this onto AI. And now deep learning revolution's been powered. It took 25 years for us to realize that GPUs are like the natural way to run AI programs. And that's before we even got GPUs to sort of quote unquote work. So if you want the quantum analog to that, we won't have quantum working for another 20 years. And it may take another 20 years to realize what quantum is actually good for. So you're talking about 40 years. IonQ and Rigetti aren't going to be around, to your point, in 5 years, because they're third-tier quantum players. You and I don't have access to the first-tier quantum players. Who are the first tier players? Well, Quantinuum, PsiQuantum, Xanadu. These guys are all privately held. You can't get into these stocks unless you're a zillionaire or a VC. So the only ones that are left that are public are these shitball companies that nobody wanted, that had to go public through a SPAC, and are like, if you read Scorpion Capital's expose on IonQ, the people that run IonQ don't even go to the office. Like, everyone's so depressed, and like there's nothing at that company.
No, but
And
how are they raising cash so easily then? I just don't
now
understand.
when
They're
you have,
raising with like shitty banks.
well,
If
yeah,
you
right now, I mean, Rigetti traded 300 million shares today, so like they could raise an ATM offering. They could sell 2 million shares, or 10 million shares, or 20 million shares easily.
If you look at QUBT, they raised another 100 million with Titan Capital Partners, which is like a
Yeah.
sketchy boutique bank. So like
And
anybody will be willing to raise money.
yeah,
But
and
Martin, inevitably you think these are going to go to zero within 2 years.
oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Sooner than that. But like QBTS D-Wave has been a shit company for forever, and like they're screaming the loudest, and like nobody takes D-Wave seriously because their technology just isn't even quantum computing. But they have 7 million in revenue, right? So, but they've had 7 million in revenue for a long time, and their annealers are not very useful, and like anybody who uses them realizes that right away. But D-Wave just raised 100 or 150, and these companies like Rigetti raised money at $2 a share. Rigetti thought it was a good idea to sell stock at $2. So for Rigetti to sell stocks, for you to buy Rigetti stock at a price where they said, that's 5 times or 10 times the price, where they said, no, our stocks, we're willing to sell stock at this price to keep our company going, to keep our science experiment going. Again, the Rigetti CEO made it clear they don't have a business. The business model will be figured out in the future. But the problem with that is, as traders and as investors, we need the business to make sense today. It's not like biotech, where in biotech we know the paradigm. You have a preclinical drug, fine. One day it'll be in humans, and one day after that you'll prove whether or not it works. Even if that takes 5 to 10 years, I know this paradigm. I know what's going to happen at the end. This reminds me much more of, for a while there were these mini bubbles, like there was organ printing. There were a bunch of these organ printing companies. And that's a good example of like, hey, wouldn't it be great if I had lung disease, I could just get a new lung with my genetics and I could just print it out and I'd be cured? Sure, of course it would be, but that's science fiction. And to invest in that kind of a company, you get some hype for a minute, and then you ask the question of like, well, what do we do now? And once the hype dies down, the stocks, have to go for pennies a share. They do pipes, they do dilutive offerings, and it all sort of goes to zero at some point, and they can't do another pipe. So to me, that's the situation these companies were in. And then, the Google Willow announcement happened, and like we're in a frothy environment where people are buying meme stocks, people are buying meme tokens that are worthless, and money's been sort of free and fungible for a while, and that's why we have a ton of inflation, and equities have had a huge run, 25% back-to-back years, and people have a lot of sort of money sloshing around, and so throwing money at this thing, which went parabola up and now parabola down, and by the way, like this little move today is meaningless. The Rigetti's up, but all the other stocks didn't really go up today. And IonQ and Rigetti, Rigetti went from 1 to 20 to 6, and now it's gone from 6 to 9. But like it's going to go back to 1. And all the bag holders are going to scratch their head and say, why did I ever do this? Because, again, these companies are not the next Intel. They're not the next NVIDIA. Because we don't even know what we could use these computers for. And right now, I can't even figure out, companies in general can't figure out what they would do with tons of computers. For example, there's a Chinese company that trained a GPT class model with just $5 million. And so a lot of the Silicon Valley has been bamboozled into buying NVIDIA boxes. X famously has a ton of them. And more companies are realizing that maybe they don't need this many boxes. And Andre Karpathy, co-founder of OpenAI, and he was the head of AI at Tesla, he has a new company, but he remarked at how amazing it was that, this company, I think it was called DeepSeek in China, was able to train a high quality model with just $5 million of training capital. They're a big company, but they used $5 million on a training run, And that training run produced a world-class model. So the question is, do we even need GPUs? And so if you can't fathom what to do with thousands of GPUs, I can only fathom what to do with a working quantum computer. I would just break Bitcoin and just publish that I broke it and have the villain authority that I've so crave. But other than that, I can't really think about, what I would do with a working quantum computer. I can't think what I do with a working 20,000. You can give me 20,000 H100s tomorrow. I don't know what I would do with them. Like everything that could be done has already been done with them. So to me, like our computing, the class of computing problems we have and that we want to solve is very small. And so even if you think that maybe someday you can use these machines to do something we can't do now, even if you can't put a finger on what that is, you just know that because of this architecture, there's got to be something. Cool, I agree. That's probably true. But what computing problems do we even have that we want to solve? I can't envision that. And so you're betting on these companies perpetually getting funded by government or investors without any hope or date when we can expect that. The problem with that is that, like I said, the government pulled the plug on AI 2 or 3 times. And the government did not lead the most recent AI expansion. It was an industry that did that. But government tried to keep AI on life support for some time. And they, for example, DARPA did a ton of work in autonomous vehicles where they did an annual autonomous vehicle competition. And they eventually pulled the plug on that. But as I mentioned, Expert Systems and the Minsky affair kind of gave rise to 2 very, very deep AI winters that lasted a decade each. And quantum computing has had a winter until this Google Willow announcement. And it'll be in a winter again because it'll be a long time before these machines work. Anyway, let's go around to Sebastian.
Yeah, just really quick. And feel free not to apply this to just quantum stocks, but how do you think of, the possibility of like the outside chance of a company that is burning cash might not necessarily have a viable product soon, convincing someone to basically acquire them and rescue the company, and just as a general rule?
Yeah, my experience in that, I remember when I first started Retrophin, and we raised some private money, and I went to AbbVie, and I went to Deutsche Bank first, and Deutsche Bank introduced me to like 40 drug companies, and only one expressed interest in potentially acquiring us, which was AbbVie. We had some nice talks with AbbVie. They decided not to move forward. We had to go public, and we made a $1 billion company eventually. But big companies are very funny. Like they're very, very stingy, and they only move when they have to move. They don't just decide to slosh around and throw around $1 billion for fun. And so nobody would buy Rigetti or IonQ just for kicks. They would buy them if they went bankrupt or went close to bankruptcy. They would consider it. But even then, like NVIDIA can just hire like 40 quantum experts. They don't need anything Rigetti has or IonQ has. Like they would do a much better job on their own. And there's a reason NVIDIA hasn't done that yet, because there's no point to it. Google, from what I've heard from insiders, Google had one of their top 3 people, Larry, Sergey, and Eric, were the sort of people that ran Google. One of those 3 guys was fascinated with quantum. And he thought it was so cool and such a futuristic thing, so they decided to do work in it. Google had more money than they knew what to do with. They still do. And they kind of didn't want to show too much earnings, so they were like willing to find things to just spend and waste money on. They started a drug company called Calico. They started a life sciences effort called Verily. All these things have not produced shit. And their quantum efforts, this is sort of the same thing. Nobody at Google Quantum thinks this is going to be a big business ever. They just do it because it's like I said, it's like Bell Labs working on the transistor. Bell Labs worked on a lot of shit. Not all of it was the transistor. Not all of it ended up being Unix or C. Bell Labs worked on stuff that didn't end up panning out to be anything. So Google kind of does the same thing. And most of what Google's worked on the side has not panned out to be anything. And it probably will continue to be the case. So, the question becomes, if Google is just sort of dicking around here, and IBM seems to be the only company that's taking it really seriously, because IBM has a cloud. Google doesn't have a cloud. Google is just making prototypes and doing lab work. But IBM actually has a cloud where you can use their boxes, and they want to put out more and more boxes, and they have faith that this can happen. Now remember, IBM used to be computing the computing tabulating company. It was called CTR, and it goes back to the Hollerith with punch cards. So IBM has a heritage in building computers. They built literally the first computers. Some of them were used by the Nazis very controversially. But CTR and Hollerith merged to create IBM, and IBM was continuing to put out these types of machines, and then eventually the first digital micro PCs came out. They were a leader in that field too. They obviously exited that area, but they made mainframes, System 360, all those types of ancient computers, and they still do mainframes, obviously. And so quantum computing is coming around the corner, and they figured, let's stay involved in quantum computing. IBM had a rich research department, very similar to Bell Labs. In fact, they published foundational research on speech processing that the fellows at Renaissance Technologies, the greatest hedge fund of all time, those guys were the IBM speech research team. So, really rich science team, but not necessarily great commercially. IBM struggled sometimes with their commercial innovation. So it's really not clear if their bet on quantum makes sense or not. But all of the other guys that are in this space are just such low quality companies. Again, I encourage everyone to read the Scorpion report on IonQ. It is so scathingly bad, and I believe it because I cannot actually connect to an IonQ box on the cloud, which is kind of disgraceful. They had an unanticipated outage that they say is going to last 10 days. These aren't serious companies. Like IBM has 20 boxes on right now that you could use today, and nobody's using them because there's no real great thing you could do with them. But like I said, maybe eventually we'll find something we could do with them. But the question is, how much patience does IBM have? How much patience does Google have before they shut these down? And the publicly traded companies are one thing. The private companies have had a really hard time raising money. Honeywell decided they don't want to do this. Honeywell was also an early computing pioneer, and they did quantum for a little while, and they pulled the plug because there was no commercial opportunity. So they spun out Quantinuum, and now Quantinuum's hoping to go public. But I think the future is bleak for Quantinuum too, because how do you sort of stay alive with the science experiment, hoping and praying that this all works out? In biotech, genetic engineering gave rise to pharmaceuticals very quickly. And so the prayer is, and semiconductors work the same way. So the prayer is this will be something as well, that the technology here will give rise to some application that we don't know about yet very quickly. But the problem with these other paradigm shifting technologies is we knew right away what these would be good for. Like MNIST was really incredible. Jan LeCun implemented an ability to read postage stamps, to read zip codes on postage stamps with MNIST. This is literally what MNIST is. And this was the 80s. And that was like useful technology right away. And everyone's like, well, if this thing can see images and decode them, well, there's military applications, there's this post office application, there's an inordinate number of things you could do with it. Here, I think people just hear the word quantum computing, they think that sounds cool. When you actually, and I do too, when you boil it down and say, what can I do with this? We've kind of, I think, reached the frontier of computing where it's not really clear what we need this much compute for. When we train AI models, that seemed like a new burgeoning area of, okay, we really need compute for this. And then we realized our algorithms just sucked. And we can actually train the same models with 1/10 of the compute, 1,000th of the compute. And Moore's law doesn't stop. So the compute side keeps growing exponentially, but the training method side also does. So it turns out that maybe we don't need a million H100s to train a model, maybe you need 3. And I think that's a really big problem for NVIDIA, but it's also a big problem for quantum computing, because I stretch my imagination to think, what do I want a quantum computer for? And I can't find the answer. Anyway, let's go to Sebastian, who wants to talk.
Hello, good evening. You guys can hear me fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the first time I'm doing a space. Anyway, I just want to put a full disclosure. I have a bit of a short position on Rigetti. I bought puts on IonQ and Rigetti. It's not a whole lot of money, it's just beer money. But I graduated in computer science, and for the past 10 years, I think it was early college, I actually found out about quantum computers. I always heard, oh, it's just 20 years away. And now I'm kind of hearing the same thing. And so I had a friend talk to me, and he has no computer science background at all, but he started seeing the stocks explode, and he's like, "So, what's the big deal with the Willow chip?" And I basically explained to him, and I found this. I posted this in the comments of the space, but apparently IBM did some kind of research because my friend asked, you know, would it be possible to put quantum computers together? And apparently IBM very recently, like in November, they actually tried that and they managed to put two 127 qubit computers together to get 142 qubits. So
Right.
when you think about that, that's like, it's not going to be, what is it, 27, 254. No, you're getting,
Yeah,
it's
it's very small.
142. It's like parallel processing just doesn't like, it doesn't work like it does with GPUs. But, I'm looking at this like we have to protect quantum stocks so that crypto investors know their money's safe. But uh, um,
That's a
what
good
was I gonna
meme.
say? I had a
Joke.
good point. Oh yes. So everybody's talking about quantum. We're looking for the next NVIDIA. Well, you already have the next NVIDIA. It's called IBM. IBM is literally the next NVIDIA for quantum because IBM's been in the AI game longer than anybody else. I mean, everybody saw
And they
Watson on
couldn't
Jeopardy.
convert. Yeah.
And they couldn't make use of it. And as far as I know, when I discovered quantum, it was through IBM, and I participated in your challenge. I talked to somebody else who did, and it's very onerous to work on these computers, and they have working computers. So it's
Right.
kind of amazing to me that there's been all this noise about quantum, and IBM stock kind of didn't go up that much compared to these companies. You would think there would be some kind of explosive growth, but the one that achieved it was Willow. And to be fair, it's not like a huge breakthrough for quantum. It's just a huge breakthrough for Google, and they frankly needed it considering where the stock has been. But all these companies are celebrating Google's achievement, and then that's what's got me thinking. Like, I think people don't actually know what this is. They're just
Oh, of
kind of
course not. I
riding a
mean,
hype train.
I think you're over intellectualizing it because the reality is D-Wave, for example, that doesn't do quantum gates at all. So Google's announcement has nothing to do with D-Wave. D-Wave stock went up 10x. Then there are 2 or 3 companies that just have quantum in their name, and those went up 10x. So, or 20x even. Like Quantum Corp that makes tape drives doesn't do quantum computing. They have nothing to do with quantum computing.
And
They don't do anything quantum mechanical. They just have the word quantum in their name.
right. And so I relate this situation because you've got a lot of gamblers that are now going to become real investors pretty soon. This is look, I've got very small short positions on this because I know from my background like this isn't useful.
I have a
But
very large short position just for
no,
what's
well,
worth.
I'm already over leveraged, so I can't really do any
Yeah.
more because this just kind of came up. But I kind of relate this. What I do have a strong position in is in the cannabis investing space. Now, I kind of joined this late, right? And this I mean, you might think it's a joke, right? But my brother has autism, right? And we found that CBD oil is actually pretty effective for him. And it's kind of amazing that like you have this thing where antipsychotics just weren't cutting it. You have this thing that actually works that we've managed. And now again, it's anecdotal, right? You'd have to do clinical trials and everything. But from my perspective, I think it's useful. But from a business perspective,
Right.
cannabis has been in a winter.
It's been
4
terrible.
years.
Yeah. I used to short
Everybody
the
thought,
stocks. I actually shorted them while I was
and
in
it's a good
jail.
short. No, don't get me wrong. And especially recently with the Florida thing, Trump announced there was a bit of a Trump bump a lot earlier than the election, and it's kind of cratered. But now I think it's at bottom or bankruptcy, either one.
Well, it's
But
a tough it's a tough industry. Yeah.
my point is that a lot of marijuana speculators became long-term investors when they realized Joe Biden wasn't going to be the Messiah.
AKA bag holders.
Yes. And so depending on how Pam Bondi gets nominated this week, the next month, next 2 months, cannabis, if Trump doesn't do anything, you're going to be bag holding the next 4 years. So This is
Well,
kind
it's
of like,
funny. Cannabis
and
has been
people
so difficult because when I was trading these stocks like Tilray and Canopy and all these other cannabis stocks, they had negative gross margins. So they actually couldn't grow product, which like weed is like you would think like should be the most popular product on planet
CEO of
Earth.
Tilray is a used car salesman, or was
Yeah,
a used car salesman. So look,
but like they couldn't even give their weed away at a price that was profitable, let
they
alone
couldn't.
cover the corporate overhead.
Yeah, the thing, and that's the thing. This is a product like, okay, cannabis has uses, like from what
It's
I've
very
seen.
popular.
It's very popular. It has demand, and that's in a winter. And that it's a 4-year bag hold. It's a potentially another 4-year bag hold, and people are losing patience.
Yeah,
Now
no,
we
of
get back
course.
to quantum, which is potentially a 20-year bag hold. And this is where you really break the wills of people. And this is where it's like, yeah, it's look, it's over. It's especially like you have the 1-2 punch between Zuck and Jensen in just a weekend. Like, because it's funny, you have all these quantum CEOs going on CNBC or whatever trying to defend their companies. It's like you got a 10 billion, not even under 10 billion company, you're fighting guys who have $1 trillion companies. You think that if you could make money with this, they would already be doing it. And IBM is doing it from a research capacity. They don't want to make money. And what's funny is they've actually produced results. It's just, like you said, they're not really useful for anything. But if there were ever a company to invest in for quantum computing, it'd either be one like IBM or one that actually kind of has patents reserved. Because funny thing is, Intel actually has quite a bit of quantum patents. They've been working on this for a while. It's just not a big thing.
Right.
So these companies have a tangible holding, and yet people are ballooning these ones, which honestly I think these were propped up by algorithms, and people just started writing the algorithms up, and now they're kind of realizing. I didn't want to short it immediately. I didn't even bother touching it because I'm like, I know this is going to end badly. So it's kind of like you might have been burned shorting it. Of course, now you're probably going to make it back, but I think this was the top. I honestly think this was the top, and
Yeah, no,
especially
I
with
don't. I
the
don't
Rigetti
think they'll go.
bounce.
I don't think they'll go back to their highs, and I think anybody who shorted them probably feels a little bit of frustration today, um, because
It's a dead cat. It's a dead cat.
because of the
100%.
rally. But like the reality is, it's a gift to a short seller because it's like
Yeah, I just loaded up like in after hours, like right before I saw you actually posted the space. I just got another 20 shares to short of Rigetti, and it's like, wow, it's a gift, because yeah,
let's go over
that's
to Nolo, who's been waiting patiently.
Hey, thanks for having me, Martin. I've been following you for like the last decade. My question is this: look, now that you've killed quantum, and put the final nail in the coffin, in my mind, when are you going to do a biomedical, biopharma space? I'm really interested in immunity bio. Would love your thoughts on that, and also, what company are you bullish on?
Yeah, so I don't think quantum's dead yet. When INQ trades at 5 and Rigetti trades at 90 cents, that'll be when I take the victory lap. And by the way, one thing I'd say is when I started looking at these stocks, I thought that INQ was like more of a blue chip and Rigetti was like a rinky dink company. They're both rinky dink companies. There is no reason INQ should be at a premium to Rigetti. Like, so INQ in some ways is the better short. People seized on Rigetti because its stock price was low, and there's kind of this weird bias where individual investors like to buy stocks that have a low price for whatever reason. Mentally, they just like that. And when obviously it shouldn't make any difference. But so Rigetti's had like a more pronounced rise, but IonQ is got a huge market cap, and that's the one that I think is really scary because they actually don't operate very well. They have struggled to scale up their systems, their so-called ion trap systems, and they may need to actually throw out their entire system and start over. Whereas Rigetti has the same system, the transmon superconducting system that Google and IBM do. It's a more traditional quantum system. But Rigetti is still kind of a crappy company. They can't get a computer online, at least for me to rent. And I'd be happy to spend tons of money. So, for example, Rigetti IonQ charges $7,000 an hour to rent their quantum computer, and I'd be happy to pay the money, but you actually cannot do it right now because it's an unscheduled maintenance. So again, there's a lot of hype here. I think most people would agree, outside of the handful of people that want to talk about fundamentals. Everyone else admits that they're buying these stocks because they're going up, and when you buy stock because it's going up, it may go up, kind of continuously, just because of that. We might have some interesting quantum computing experts here joining, so I'd be happy to talk with them and go through it. Space is kind of not very technically sound, so hopefully they can join and speak. But I've been trying to add people, and it's been a little rough. So if you're not going to speak and you're a speaker right now, you just drop down. It'd be great. Anyway, who else wants to talk about quantum?
Martin, I've kind of an AI question. Do you want to keep it on quantum, or can we slide over
there? Let's try to keep it on quantum, because that's the. But sure. What is it?
Cool. Well, just this is kind of on what you were speaking about before. You were talking about NVIDIA, and essentially that they could just hire a bunch of people and essentially duplicate what IonQ or Rigetti are doing right now. So, just a general question. I think a ton of the money has came in on not on the software level, on the hardware level, as far as AI goes. Which I know is a little off topic, but just curious, do you foresee it kind of moving towards the software level? And the reason this ties in is I think everybody's realizing right now, you could spend all the money you want on compute, GPUs. If you don't have the right data, you don't have the right systems, it means jack shit. So that's kind of what you were talking about before. It just kind of got me thinking, do you think there's going to be a push now kind of more into the software side? And do you think that's a good place to look?
Yeah, it's very analogous to quantum computing, as you mentioned. And there's this constant battle between, do you want to be in the hardware, or do you want to be in the software layer? And I think that it remains to be seen. All the people making AI hardware, I think will probably regret it. And the softwareware seems to always win. On the quantum side, what I'd say about NVIDIA is that I wouldn't say that NVIDIA would hire 40 people and replicate IonQ or whatever. NVIDIA would hire 40 people and vastly surpass them. And IonQ and Rigetti haven't done anything in this space that's even remotely interesting. And again, Google is sort of not taking this that seriously. They have a team, but I think if NVIDIA were to go into quantum, it would be pretty bullish. But there's a reason they have resisted thus far. And Jensen said, we're not a picky company. If there was an opportunity in quantum, we would take it. We would get into the space, no problem. But
that's a great point.
He doesn't care. He said, I'm agnostic. If this is a way to, he's like, we do compute. We just did a CPU. They did a CPU. I'm sure people saw that recently. They're putting out a desktop. So he's like, I don't care what it is. I'll make it. But he decided that, there's nothing there. So I think that, I feel bad for people buying these stocks who, if they feel like they're getting in early on something big, they're not. But if you're buying the stock because you like to gamble and it's gone up a lot, and you look around the stock market for excitement, and you look at the drug industry, the one I followed for so long, Pfizer, Novartis, Novo Nordisk, Lilly, Merck, these are boring fucking stocks. They never move. So if you want adventure in the stock market, yeah, it's here. These stocks are fucking crazy. And a lot of people are attracted to crypto, where they can get a 100x leverage. And this is the closest thing you can get to scratch that crazy, wild gambling itch. And that's really what this is. And that's why companies like QSI, who has nothing to do with quantum mechanics, rallied a lot. Quantum Corp, who makes literally tape, magnetic tape, not quantum. Quantum Corp rallied, from 3 to 70, and now it's at 20 something, because people are realizing this has nothing to do with quantum computing. IonQ has something to do with quantum computing, at least. And then there's this really weird fraudulent company, LAES, which is called Seal SQ. And I've been researching this company, and they're trying to like glom onto the quantum bandwagon, but they've also done this with NFTs, social media, and like a whole bunch of other things. So it's just this weird little fraud company that I've been shorting. And then D-Wave, which doesn't even do quantum gates. So like this space is obviously just a space that a bunch of people have gotten excited about gambling in, and obviously people have gotten burned in it. But whether these stocks will go back up to their old highs or not remains to be seen. But it's certainly not something I would rely on for like an actual successful investment thesis. But if you like to gamble, by all means, gamble. But don't think that you're getting into something interesting. You're just trying to flip your money very quickly in a stock that you think might go up a lot, like AMC or GameStop or something like that. Anybody else want to dive in here?
Yeah, Martin. Martin, good day. Sorry, is it possible to pivot to ivermectin, if you don't mind?
To ivermectin?
Yes.
Well, this space is about quantum computing, so
okay, sorry.
Maybe if we have a little bit of time later, we can talk about it. But let's talk quantum first. Alex?
Hey, everybody. Hey, just want to add, again, preface, I do have a short position on this. When Jensen said he's 20 years away, and Zuck also said 10 years away or 20 years away, I don't think people realize that in terms of programming and just the way the architecture is set out right now, currently, even blockchain, the languages would have to change because right now we're using an 8-bit system, meaning, we use the 8-bit RAM and we program languages using 8-bit RAM, obviously. For quantum, there's nothing like that right now. That's why Martin is doing all that stuff, and it takes him so long to factor a number, because there is no infrastructure to actually process the code that we have today. So if I wanted to build a program that just printed out some type of output, it would take so many instructions for me to do it in quantum, because again, the machine language is so much different than it is now. So imagine building a pharmaceutical system or any type of system on a quantum computer would take years, because there is no web in quantum. There is no C++. There is no object-oriented programming. There's no Java right now.
Well, those are being built, and I think the point that I underline what you said is that Jensen and Zuck and others have all said we got 15 to 30 years, which is basically just a question of like, it's not even meant to be an accurate time frame. It's just like a long fucking time from now, basically. And that's fine. But if it was a long time from now to a miracle, I would be long all these stocks because I can wait 15 years. I'll still be here in 15 years. And I want, like, if this is going to change everything, I'll just fucking buy and wait. No problem. I'll buy every single quantum stock. One of them is going to go up 1,000x. But it's not. It's 15 to 30 years before quantum can run a few of the algorithms that we think could be useful. And as I've said, like 15 to 30 years from now, you may be able to factor RSA 2048. But factoring RSA 2048 would be useful today. But it would not be useful 20 or 30 years from now, because by definition, if we could break RSA 2048, we'd move on from RSA 2048. And so what is the payoff here? If you can prove to me that quantum will change everything in 20 years, yeah, these are great, potential stocks. I wouldn't buy them necessarily. IonQ is freaking 10 billion or whatever market cap it is, or it was. But, I'd be interested in that potential payoff someday. But what you're really talking about is being able to factor integers 20 years from now when people won't care about it. Again, our RSA has been around 50 years. We've been relying on this crypto system for 50 years, and eventually we're just going to switch to something else. There's a lot of potential places we can go with it. So I think if you're talking about material science and stuff like that, again, look at Schrodinger. They make material science software today, and it doesn't sell that much. And if you talk to any material scientist, including pharmaceutical scientists, and you ask them, would this really help your work? I think most people would say, nah, not really. And even then, like, would that make these quantum computers very valuable if they could do one thing really well, that doesn't seem to me like it's going to be worth a ton. You know, if they could do some miraculous thing, that then I'd be interested. But it doesn't seem to me that there's anything that they can do. Let's talk to Facendo.
Hey, Martin, funny you bring up material sciences. I'm a materials and process engineer at Blue Origin, but I definitely agree. Like, I don't see that benefiting my line of work in any way possible. But I'm curious, like, for all the bulls that are out
Hello.
there, like, what are the like
Anybody
actual?
else want to discuss this matter?
Oh, can you not hear me? Can you
Well,
not hear me,
anyway,
Martin?
I do think these are good shorts.
Hey, Martin, Fascinato was talking, but I think maybe you can't hear him.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, what's he saying?
I don't know. It sounded pretty good, but too bad, I guess.
He's saying he's a material science engineer at Blue Origin. He should probably just do a lap and come back.
Yeah,
I'll
leave the
come
space
back
and come
up.
back. I'd love to have this discussion.
Yeah, I want to maybe comment on the theoretical physics side of it a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I actually visited a couple of the labs and spoke to the engineers that are actually working on the stuff like at the hardware level. And there seems to be something slightly mysterious about the noise that not a lot of people are commenting on or willing to comment on, perhaps. And there's some kind of speculation we were working on that there might be something like a fundamental noise flaw, which can limit the cost benefit of these quantum computers. Because at some point, you're going to do so much error correction that the cost benefit payoff doesn't.
Yeah, we were talking about we were talking about this earlier. There's somebody who's published on this exact problem. I personally think it's solvable. I don't think you want to do it with ion traps, but I do think you could do it with transmons. But it is a point that, you know, potentially you can't scale these things. Google's Willow announcement was sort of supposed to defeat that point, but again, your point remains, and I'd invite you to keep talking. I just want to sort of narrate that a little, and then if
I mean, it's not just purely scaling. There's like a theoretical fundamental limit in like the physical universe potentially.
And this thermodynamic, or is that?
It's somewhat related, but it's more about at the quantum scale. So thermodynamics is a slightly different effect. But the point here is that you can reduce a lot of noise from all kinds of sources in the lab, but certain types of noise could be intrinsic to the system itself, and that's now just being researched. The problem is funding of this kind of research and the incentives behind, you know, getting this looked at more deeply doesn't align with what's allowed
so I guess
you get there.
I guess what you're saying is that even at 0 Kelvin or millikelvin, you know, 5 millikelvin, 5 microkelvin, whatever, you know, close to absolute zero, or using, you know, a zero pressure chamber, using lasers to control ions, you know, there's ultimately, it's going to be very, very hard to have matter, you know, obey your sort of directives due to some like fundamental fluctuation in field theory or some other like, you know, dynamic of the universe.
Yeah, practically what happens in these chambers is that you're trying to isolate noise sources. So literally a light bulb will go on in the room, you know, where they're running these experiments, and that will be a certain source of noise. So you can use like algorithms, you can do all kinds of stuff to try to figure that out and like disqualify that type of source of noise. But there's still a lot of noise there, and some of it might just be from the system itself, from the fact that you're doing these computations. It's, you know, and we talk about at the theoretical level now. There's something to look at there, and an interesting piece of advice I got from somebody that really knows about this space is when you do experimentation, that's when the rubber hits the road in terms of actually figuring out the facts behind this thing. A lot of the experimentation, you only keep the data of what you're interested in, and everyone's trying to focus on like the computation. They're not studying the noise itself, and that is something that might be more interesting. Is like this noise is actually revealing something fundamental about the universe, and quantum computers trying to get around it might
Yeah, I mean, Beth Jesus has a little bit to say on this sometimes. And then the other thing I'd just add is there was a paper in Nature, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, where they did a lead shielding around a quantum computer and found the noise dropped quite a bit because it excluded gamma rays, which were causing huge amounts of noise, and that they got much higher fidelity after shielding the system. And then Chris Monroe of IonQ has said that even a truck driving by the office was enough for the states to collapse. So anyway, let's hear from Facendo, who's been waiting.
Yeah. Hey, Martin, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, yeah, I was just saying, you brought up like potential implementations for like material scientists with quantum computing, and like, I guess just from where I stand, I'm not a huge quantum guy by any means. I mean, I think that the stocks are way overvalued, but I don't see that benefiting us in any way possible. I'm
Really?
curious. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I really don't know like what the use cases would be in material sciences or engineering for that stuff. What are you thinking with that?
Well, I mean, let's say you could simulate a huge system, um, 1,000 atoms, 10,000 atoms, even a million atoms, and you could simulate, what they would do in space. Wouldn't that be exciting? I'm sure you use product. I don't know what level of MD you do, but like if you do DFT and stuff like that, you might use Amber or GROMACS or some of those things. That's kind of what I use on the pharmaceutical side. And knowing how these materials might behave, uh, could allow you theoretically to design, I don't know, a superconductor or some other type of system, which could be, exciting. Uh, maybe a doped system or a new alloy or something like that. That's kind of the theory. But when you actually ask people, how would you do that? It's kind of difficult. For example, could you find the global minima of resistance for a material or something like that? That's the theory, at least. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Yeah, it does. I think, for our purposes, just like standard finite element analysis is typically sufficient for everything that we need to do. And so like anything beyond that is like just overkill. Like I'm sure if you went to SpaceX and told them this, they would tell you to fuck off. But like if you went to Blue Origin or someone like us or someone else who's a little bit slower to things, you might entertain us for a little bit. But like really, I don't see it being of huge benefit by any
Well,
means.
that's kind of how I feel on the pharma side, having designed, you know, having done lots of experiments in computational chemistry over the last 20 years. Um, I have a curiosity, and that's what these companies are interested in. That's where they'll occasionally, $100 billion company like Merck will occasionally cut a check and say, all right, well, I want to see what this is all about. And every 5 years, I'm going to cut a check to one of these companies and see what the state of the art is and see how it has advanced. And back in the day with computational chemistry, the dawn of it, people were trying to think about computational chemistry in the 70s. And eventually it got to a point around, I would say 2005 to 2010, where it's actually useful. And especially, after that. And so, like, you want to stay on top of things just to see how they develop. That's part of your job. And you might say, okay, wow, circuit simulators are really good right now. They used to suck. They're really good now. Right now, I'm going to use them. And the dream is that someday, there will be this great application. But without even a horizon to look at, and to your point, there's nothing there that you see. On pharma, there's nothing there that I see. I do really like the encryption side. I do like the quantum communication side. So there are things that you could look forward to. But again, these are small markets. I mean, the encryption side is not something I think that's going to, be a world beater. Some people do think that encryption could be, or decryption, could be really exciting. I'd love to hear anyone who wants to think of that. I think while the state is very excited to read secrets, I think they would not spend like $10 billion to do so. NSA is very interested in eavesdropping, but I just don't know what the price tag would be. And I think they could use quantum resources judiciously so that, like, for example, their $2 billion annual compute budget, are they going to grow that to 20 billion? I don't sort of see that happening. And even if it did, it would be still 20 years from now. I think we finally got Manav in here, which is really exciting.
Hey man, so my connection is really choppy, so I might drop out. Is that all right? Like,
Yeah, you
but
sound good right now.
so there's a few technical things which I can help answer if people want it, because I work on the core of quantum computing. There's people who said we don't understand noise well enough. So if you want to throw words at me, I can tell you what they mean. So the first thing was that you're referring to decryption, right? Like the easiest one. So I agree. Most of us actually, even in quantum computing, don't think that factoring is going to be like a big end all be all of it, because the algorithms required to do factoring are all multi-qubit unitaries. And doing that is like, so if doing a single qubit gate is hard, doing a double qubit gate is about like 10 times hard, doing a multi-qubit unitary is about 100 times as hard. So the barrier to do that is crazy high. There's like no way we expect that. The way we expect it to actually work out is by something called a harvest now decrypt later attack, where effectively massive communications of people right now are being stored, RSA, AES, whatever, and we expect to decrypt them later and catch criminals backwards. That's what we are largely expecting to happen. And I can almost put money on the fact that NSA, ISI, these big SAS, all these big people are already collecting our what do you call it, communications. So that's one part of it. Noise floor, I don't know what somebody meant. If you want to clarify, we can get through that. Material simulations, there's two kinds of problem with material simulations. So the first is bosonic simulations, which we are basically down at. We can encode bosonic simulations on the qubit itself as is. The problem which arises right now is fermionic simulations, which is what we are struggling with. So all the new papers and all are about fermionic simulations. The way it will actually help you is the easiest one, like the least barrier one, the shit which you can try today, even with some decent sized molecules, is you can predict the ground state energy of the particular molecule and then see if it matches a reaction overhead. So an example would be, let's say you have two elements A and B which react to give you C. You can find out the ground state energy of A, you can find out the ground state energy of B, and you can find out the ground state energy of C. So now that you have the ground state energy of A, B, and C, you can actually find out what the reaction overhead for A plus B going to C is, and backwards. So that's one place where we expect it to help out really well. So there are people who are working on similar such kinds of research, let's say, where you can predict extremely specific properties of what it is doing. So then we also have Ising chains. Ising chains can calculate magnetization. So there's this new area coming up where people are actually trying to predict, where if you have multi-dimensional Ising chains, Kagome lattices, Ising chains, grids, etc., can you predict larger scale magnetizations of properties, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think everything you said is right. I think that the question becomes commercially, who gets excited for this stuff and why. And I think that, like, one analog that I was sort of talking with my friends about is NMR. So Bruker sells these NMR machines, and they're very expensive, and they do one thing really, really well, and they're used in material science as well as pharmaceuticals. And Bruker is a successful company. They sell, these very specialized machines for a very expensive amount to really specialized researchers. And, ultimately Bruker's, it's a $4 billion company. They sell a lot of stuff. If you just spun out NMR, maybe it's $1 billion. I don't know. But, the kind of work you're talking about reminds me of NMR, where it's like, kind of a nice to have. You could obviously get some of those ground state or activation energy questions empirically, possibly. You'd rather have them in a computer, of course. But, one question is always like, will a non-quantum algorithm ever be able to optimize for these possibilities? Which, I'll put a sort of a thumbtack in that for now. But I guess, using the NMR analogy, like if we're looking at 10 or 20, 30 years from now, we're going to have systems that can be used by a handful of engineers to solve some questions that may or may not be of like fundamentally huge importance. this is still sort of like a very small market that's not that thrilling. It's thrilling to people like me and you because it's fascinating and it's amazing. You're getting at the heart of physics. That's one of the coolest things ever. But from a business perspective, to me, it kind of reminds me of like a watered down NMR in terms of a business. But I don't know if you have anything to say to that, or we can sort of go around the room to a few other people, like James. Seems like he wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to take a question for Manav as well. What is your thinking around quantum native algorithms? Because we don't really have one yet. Shor's algorithm is, something that quantum computers could run, but it's not quantum native. Do you think that would potentially get us to have a breakthrough here?
Hey man, sorry, I'm not familiar with the term of quantum native. Can you give me some background on it? Then I'll tell you. Like I know there's a few big five algorithms which we say that this is like the holy grail of quantum computing, which will do everything. But I'm not sure those are the same thing.
No, it's just rethinking about the algorithm itself to be quantum first. So like if you were in a quantum computer, what kind of algorithms would you run? Right now, we're just running like Turing machine code on quantum computers. So
no, we aren't actually running Turing machine code. We are running qubit code only. The catch is that it's extremely inefficient. Like if you think about Shor's algorithm also, the way Shor's algorithm works is a qubit, effectively, if you think about it in your brain, is a ball, right? You can encode your data anywhere inside or on that ball. Shor's algorithm right now does it only in one plane. It's like a flat plane in the center. So even when Oded Regev came out with his improvement on Shor's algorithm, let's say, he took it one dimension up. But there's still a lot of unexplored territory, even in just Shor's algorithm, to make a lot more efficient.
This is what's called the block sphere. I was trying to explain
Yeah, that's
my
it.
girlfriend.
That's exactly.
Yeah, so you have, I think a lot of people, if you read my Substack, I sort of talked a little bit about this. I mean, it's really a miracle what you could theoretically sort of like get your head around here in quantum. It does open your mind to like this unbelievable thing, and that's why I've been tantalized and fascinated by this space for a long time. And Feynman and David Deutsch, kind of conjured this space a long time ago. And so the question becomes like, if you could take these spheres, the Bloch sphere, Bloch is, by the way, Bloch. He was a physicist, and sort of get your head around like how you can encode information in these and then operate on them. You have such an exponential growth in what you can actually compute that it's kind of a miracle. But then the question becomes, what do you want to compute? What is there to compute? And like, if you remember Folding at Home and SETI at Home, SETI at Home was something that inspired me as a kid. It was really, really exciting idea that you could analyze radio telescope data. And this was the first example of distributed computing, at least for the masses. And then Folding at Home kind of came as its successor. SETI at Home was around the early 90s. And Folding at Home kind of came in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the idea was that you could help protein fold. Distributed compute has kind of died since then. And I think one of the reasons is there's actually not a lot of huge problems to solve. Like, for example, the Mersenne prime search was another thing that fascinated me as a kid. You could use your computer to calculate the next highest Mersenne prime. But what does that mean? Is that a business? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a stupid prime number. So ultimately, like, what are we going to actually use these machines for? I don't doubt that someday some future genius will figure out a way to use these machines for an interesting thing. But as of right now, I can't think of a thing I would actually do other than break Bitcoin.
Actually, on that, how would you actually break Bitcoin? Because there's cracking the wallet, there's cracking the block for the specific hash at that moment. Like, is there more that you could do?
Hash reversal is easy, that's all. I mean, like you can figure out, the question with Bitcoin is that it requires you to find a hash with some n number of zeros at one side, right? So you can literally just run the algorithm in a quantum computer in parallel and do it all at once. So
yeah, but that's for one
while
block.
the
I mean, what are you
hit
going to
rate is very low.
No. So the idea is that you could find somebody's private key given their public key.
Okay, one key at a time. Yeah, okay. Hack a whale. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, exactly. So if you told me the key, the private key of your wallet, I could actually reverse into a public key. Now, the problem with that is that, and again, I know way too much about this, but there's been a change to the way Bitcoin keys work, and a lot of the new ones are under this taproot mechanism, but the old ones are under this thing called PTPK, and you actually reveal the private key in the transaction. So today you just have a hash of it. So the amount of Bitcoin that's hackable by quantum computer sort of in a clear straight shot is something like 20% of Bitcoin out there. The rest of it's sort of been moved to this taproot mechanism that conceals the private key. So nevertheless, theoretically, you could race through every private key or use QC to find a way to say, okay, give me the private key to this, give me the public key to this private key, or give me the private key to this public key, and try to set it to the biggest wallet, Binance's wallet or Satoshi's wallet or whatever. And of course, for me, the thrill in this is not the money; it's actually the academic notoriety. Much more so because obviously, one, I mean, the money part is it's illegal to take somebody's money. I've learned this the hard way, and it's not something I'd repeat. Two, you cannot actually get away with stealing all the Bitcoin in the world because ultimately, it's very traceable. And two, you can, quickly adapt or, pivot Bitcoin to a new quantum scheme, a new encryption scheme that's quantum resistant, and Bitcoin will be just fine. But I think the notoriety of taking on the biggest challenge would be exciting. But the problem I've had with factorization is you only have so many bits to work with. And things start to break after you get to a certain amount of bits. The circuits get pretty complicated. And like just doing a adder has been a little bit painful for me. But I've sort of gotten these adders to work, and then after sort of 20 or 30 bits, they start to break. And the advertised 150 qubits on IBM's machine, I'm not really 100% clear that they actually all work. So
no, that's the noise.
Yeah, some of IBM's qubits are really bad. They're just terrible. Bad connections between two qubits. Some of them have very low T1 times. You look at them and you're like, why are these on the system?
Well, as I'm on this journey, I'm very willing to pay, like I said, the $7,000 an hour for IonQ's box or whatever it is for Rigetti's box, but they can't even put their boxes online. They're offline right now. So IBM's...
So Rigetti, I know the issue actually, without getting into too much detail, because some of it I'm bound by this thing. Rigetti is trying to build error correction onto their system. So they're actually testing out this new area called smallest computing codes, which are smaller than the existing ones. So they're trying to effectively eliminate one particular kind of error to see what they can do with it. So they are in experiment right now. And then there's some issues with the cloud mechanism. Like the crazy thing is that despite knowing so much about quantum computing, they know basically nothing about classical computing and the distribution infrastructure. So they just fucked that up. That's all. It's not like anything shady going on. I can just assure you that.
It definitely, I definitely am not accusing them of anything shady. I think it's just an example of like the stability of these systems that, you advertise 150 qubits, but it becomes not just on the hardware, not just on the software side. I complain about Qiskit quite a bit, but Qiskit aside, the hardware side doesn't seem that reliable. And that's
it's probabilistic still at this point. That's the thing a lot of people don't realize as well. You have to run the algorithm like many times to get a probabilistic answer.
Yeah, I've been doing 4,000 shots, to get a probabilistic answer. But the probabilistic answers are correct. So the factoring experiments I've done are great, and I would almost call them impressive. But they stopped being impressive when I ran out of kind of the ability to factor, say, a 6-digit or a 10-digit number. And one of my researchers showed me that the maximum possible number you could evaluate is sort of 10 to the 10th, which is quite well short of an interesting number. So it'll be interesting to see how that grows. And for me, I'm very interested in keeping tabs on this because let's say the next machine comes out and I can get 10 to the 15th. And the next machine comes out and you get 10 to the 20th. Now you need 10 to the 70th to crack Bitcoin. So, or at least theoretically, that's how many states 2 to the 256th is roughly 10 to the 70th. So, that doesn't mean your algorithm can't do it. But to the point about unitary is like, we're still very far away from logical qubits at all. And, we'll sort of see if we'll get there. IBM's sort of promising 1,000 qubit chip this year. And the fact that IonQ is sitting there saying they hopefully can deliver a 100 qubit chip this year tells me that like they're literally an order of magnitude behind IBM. This is like back in the day, Intel in the 70s had competition, but nobody here can tell me which semiconductor companies in the 1970s did Intel compete with, because they're all gone. and betting on and betting on IonQ or Rigetti now is like betting on one of those companies. Now, look, one of them might be Intel, but chances are it's not one of these guys. It's going to be some future company or private company or a division or spin out of IBM or Lord knows what.
So I've got a question about just investing, or rather putting shorts on these companies. Is there not, in the concept of making these economic bets, companies that don't have a market and like not a legit revenue stream, but are still good bets and can actually like be profitable payoffs? Like, is there a world in which shorting these things just because there is no market and it's propped up by federal funding might actually be a good bet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to consider here. So the first is the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent, and the stock IonQ can go to $10,000 tomorrow and put you out of business, and that's it. So learn how to hedge and learn how to limit your risk, and you should never put all of your eggs in one basket and all that stuff. The second thing I'd say is this distinctly reminds me of my first trade, nearly my first trade on Wall Street. I joined the hedge fund. It was Jim Cramer's hedge fund, and I learned about a company called Human Genome Sciences. And I had big affection for science in general, and biology and chemistry specifically. And Jim was kind enough to say, you can look at the biotech stocks. And Human Genome was a company that basically didn't have a business. They decoded the human genome, but so did NIH. Craig Venter was able to sort of do it faster, but he didn't have a business model around it. It was just sort of a technical achievement. Does that remind you of anything? That technical achievement didn't have revenue associated with it. There's no business there. Eventually, Human Genome pivoted to what? Well, they just became a normal drug company. Did they use any of their genomic data? Nope. They didn't do anything with their genomic data. They went after a target that was well known in the B-cell world. They made the first lupus drug, and they got bought out by their partner, GSK, for a very small amount. The stock went to like some stratospheric numbers, like a $10 billion company, and then it cratered to a $1 billion company, and they sort of tried to pivot into a drug company, and they did that somewhat successfully and sold at $2 billion. So to me, a really smart management team could probably pivot correctly, but I don't think you
use
have
the
to.
hype and then bet on the people maybe, or something. The people that are using
there's
hype
something
money.
you could do. Yeah, like quantum sensing is a somewhat real field. So there are things you could do, but like to me, it reminds me a lot of Human Genome and other .coms where like their business models were more experimental than they were real. And we know the semi business, right? The semiconductor business has also been around 50 something years. And, to me, this doesn't feel or look like the semiconductor business because I can't do anything on these chips right now. Whereas I think with Intel, when the 8086 came out and all the other early chips, you could actually do stuff. And there were primitive computers like UNIVAC and EDVAC and stuff like that, the Manchester, the Mark, all these early computers, and government liked them. Government said, I can calculate ballistics trajectories with this. I can do integrals with this. I can do, there's stuff you could do, and you saw a pathway that made sense. Here, the only pathway to me is leading me to decryption or leading me to this like very niche area of material science, which, it's sort of a question of, is that even a market that is even close to relevant size for, a Boeing, a Lockheed Martin, a couple of companies, space companies, certainly, interested in making a super strong, alloy or something like that, to me, that seems like a very, very small market. And these are the only two kind of legitimate markets that I can think of. Some people point out quantum optimization, like traveling salesman or 3SAT or some other interesting complexity problems. Those are somewhat interesting, maybe, but still not really clear that they are a business. So to me, I think they're good shorts, but you also have to basically realize that what you're betting on has nothing to do with the science that we're talking about. The science is really beautiful and amazing, and if you study enough quantum mechanics, you'll probably go crazy. But I think that what you're actually betting on here is the willingness of people to gamble. And people are willing to gamble in bull markets. In bull markets, you buy stocks that are going up, and they're going up fast, and they go down fast. And when they go down fast, you lose all your money. But if you can find enough people to gamble on a stock, it might go up fast enough for you to make some money. And that's what this is. This has nothing to do with Schrodinger. This has nothing to do with entanglement. This has nothing to do with superposition. If it did, then you'd have stocks like Quantum Corp, which I remember the old Quantum, not just their tape drives, but they actually made cassette tapes too for music, because you can store on these cassette tapes. It's the same magnetic process where you store data and music. Music is data. And so Quantum Corp made both cassette tapes and tape drives. And tape drives were very good, and in some ways they're still good, for storing massive amounts of data. Obviously, cloud services like S3 from Amazon and Azure and others, they kind of are using different types of storage media, but some people still use Quantum Corp's old tape drives. Quantum Corp stock went up 30x. 30x. That's not because of anything other than people want to gamble. It's no different from DraftKings or FanDuel or Fartcoin. Fartcoin is another one I've been on a crusade against. Fartcoin is up to $1 billion or $1.5 billion.
But Foxconn has the power of memes behind it.
It does, but I think this quantum boom shows you that you don't even need a meme. Quantum Corp, QMCO, they have not even said a word about quantum computing or addressed this boom in their stock price that, they were basically slowly going out of business because nobody needs tape drives anymore. And their stock was at $3 after slowly drifting from $8. It shoot up to $70 from $3 because their name is
They
Quantum.
should have pivoted, yeah. Some stock and pivot, yeah.
Right, but the only thing they have to do with Quantum is they just have a futuristic sounding name. And so to me, it shows me that anybody trying to study the fundamentals of IonQ or Rigetti or any other quantum thing,
yeah, good luck right now. Yeah.
That's not what we're trading here. What we're trading is how much hype can fit in one stock and what is the predilection of people to be willing to gamble for a big return. And we all know what happens in gambling, that the house typically wins at the end. And that's already happened here. IonQ went from 1 to 20. All of the volume happened at 20. The stock's at 9 now. So all of the pain that happened at 20 has been realized. And sure, you might be able to get in at 9 and exit at 10, but the parabolic move is sort of completed. Now, quantum will still be around in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years because there are people like Manav and myself and others that like this space and are curious about it. And who knows, maybe someday there will be some amazing revolutionary thing you can do with these machines. And I bet you there will someday. But it doesn't mean you should buy IonQ or Rigetti. These are stocks that are almost certainly going to lose money. And to your point, in biotech, there was a company called Alnylam. They didn't have a single drug in humans, but they were doing something called siRNA. And siRNA was a really good idea. And now they're one of the biggest biotech companies. But at the time they went public, they didn't have a single drug. But you could have invested knowing that, okay, someday these will be drugs. And now they have drugs that are FDA approved and they sell and they're a huge drug company. So I think there is some...
But there's a precedence in bio, that's the difference, right?
Well, yes, but I'd also say that Alnylam, ALNY is the ticker for anybody that doesn't know it. Alnylam had a winter too. And I was actually short on Alnylam years ago, and they slowly crept out of that winter. They put a drug into humans. It didn't blow the human up. They put another drug into humans. They slowly showed that they had a little promise. And so if we see that in quantum, the story can change. But right now, the story, I think, is what it is. But this is why we watch an industry. And Willow sort of sparked this change, but the change in Willow was not proportional to the change in these stocks. So I think that's sort of one thing to keep in mind. They'll go back down, but we'll have another quantum rally in 2027 or 2029 or whatever. And it may be different stocks. Quantinuum is supposed to be going public, probably will be going public shortly here. IonQ might go bankrupt. Rigetti might go bankrupt. They might merge. They may still be around. We don't know what'll happen. Google might spin out their quantum division as a new company called, G Google or Google Quantum or something, or G Quantum or God knows what, and just spin it out like they've sort of planned to do with Waymo. So there's a ton of things that could happen between now and then. But I think these stocks are pretty awful stocks in the meantime. And I made a lot of money shorting them, and I'm still fully short them. So I feel like, just like some of the other stocks I've shorted, they will collapse and disappear. But, there's nothing wrong with buying them if you like to gamble. But you can also go gamble on the Chiefs, who probably will win the Super Bowl. And that's a better bet than betting on these stocks, which, it's almost certain you will lose everything if you stay long. But a lot of people like to play hot potato, where they buy the stock, and typically they're buying an option, by the way, and they buy the option and they pray that the option pays out, because the option could pay out 20x or 50x, and that's fun. Everybody wants to make 50x. But the problem with these options is that every time you buy an option, Jane Street, Susquehanna, or Citadel makes 5% on you, or 2 or 3% on you, because the spread between the bid and ask of these options is fairly wide. And you should be executing kind of in the middle. But typically, even in the middle, these options trade at, like, say, $1.20. If you buy it at $1.23, it's actually a massive delta. It's a 3%, slippage from maybe its fair value. And anybody who's buying these doesn't care about the fair value. They care about getting the 20x or the 50x. In case the underlying stock goes up, the option might skyrocket. But Jane Street and Citadel love this stuff because it's just free money. My estimation that we calculated in our office today is that today alone, Jane Street, Citadel, Susquehanna, and anybody else who does this, there's a number of firms who do, probably made around $200 or $300 million just facilitating today these trades in quantum. And every day that this kind of insanity happens, where they trade hundreds of millions of shares for no reason, they're printing hundreds of millions of dollars. This is like the greatest thing ever for Jane Street. They're like the casino, and you want to, buy these options. They'll sell them to you for a percentage off, 2% off, 3% off, and the buyers are totally agnostic as to what they're paying for these. So it's really interesting, really, really interesting stuff. George
It would be
Santos.
cool if you could invest in quantum technology without investing in these companies. But great space. I'm going to jump off now. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, James. Oh, man. Yeah. Hey, George.
Martin, how are you? Speaking of quantum, have you covered the fact that we're eons behind China on this and that we need to do something about it in order to be competitive?
That's interesting. You, as a congressman, former congressman, you may know more about this than I do. So my own 2 cents, which is probably less informed than yours, is that while China has published some stuff in the space, obviously not everyone is publishing what they need to. The centralized system they have, command and control or whatever, is kind of better for this type of thing than the system we have. And I say that as a patriot, but our system kind of relies on, well, you've got government, they're sort of hands off, and they want to do some stuff, so they'll throw some money at some companies, and they hope the companies figure it out. And this obviously is not the way to go if you have a Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project, we had command and control, and it worked out really well. It was like very directed. Like,
well, play devil's advocate, but the Manhattan Project also relied on a lot of foreign intelligence, meaning foreign actors playing within the Manhattan Project that then took all of our research, stole it, and brought it back to their homelands. Hence, everybody went to the nuclear races, right? So
That is a point that's very important. But I would just say
so
that
be
if you
careful
want,
with the Manhattan Project analogies in quantum, because in Congress, when obviously in some less classified natures, we had hearings about this in 2023. Nobody was paying attention because, again, it wasn't a hot topic button and everybody was concerned with whatever flashy, shiny thing was in front of them. But quantum computing is literally the one thing today that should concern most people as far as the races to global dominance and to continue to be the main player, and also in a way to make up for deficits of governments on generating revenue. So there's countries out there, real quick, Barton, and then I'll conclude it. So there's countries like China that are breaking the cycle of the only form of generating revenue that their nations have is by taxation. Like we are, our model is taxation. The United States government doesn't produce anything, right? The Chinese have kind of figured that out. We need to step up our game. Taxation is not sustainable to be the only form of funding government. So that's why I saw the title and I was like, oh fuck, I gotta chime in. So
yeah, I mean, as a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, I couldn't agree more that taxation is not the way to go. But in terms of quantum itself, I have a couple things to say, and your insight will actually be really helpful. So I think the main use of quantum is going to be decryption. And we talked about that for like an hour or two before you got here. And let's just run with that, assuming that that's true. So again, you're in government. You know a lot of people in government. I know a lot of the people in government. You know them better. And they're some of the most powerful people in the world. And the question sort of becomes, well, what can you do with this? And where's the NSA's role in the world writ large? And again, I certainly don't want you to you would never do that anyway, but I want to treat the subject a little bit gingerly because it normally is extremely sensitive. So the way I look at it, the NSA, again, not many people know the budget. There have been some leaks, documents that say the budget is anywhere between 15, 20 billion, and maybe 10 or 20% of that is compute. That's a compute budget that generally is kind of storing more than computing, I think. And one day quantum could conceivably decrypt the communications of our adversaries. Now, that's a great thing as a patriot. As a business person, the government's a perfectly fine customer, and it could potentially buy a lot of this stuff to simply do that. But one question, and again, I'm trying to phrase this like in a way that sort of makes sense to have the discussion at all, in public at least, is, to the extent that appetite exists, does it make sense for these communications, which are probably like low intensity, like I'm guessing a lot of this very sensitive communications of our adversaries may not even be over electronic channels, or they might be in an encryption form that is quantum secure. But to the extent that 20 or 30 years from now we could read communications of today, is that an interesting business? Is that something that NSA would spend many billions of dollars on, given the whole budget of the CIA and FBI, at least the FBI one is public, is about 15 billion annually, and that's for field agents and stuff like that. NSA and CIA are thought to be somewhat similar in size and scope. So I'm curious how you react to some of that in terms of like if it is just encryption decryption that is the pie here, and obviously I think it's fairly clear that sure I would love to decrypt my ex-girlfriend's communications, but ultimately from a nation state perspective, the last thing I'll add is when the WikiLeaks cables were released, they weren't that exciting, and there was a lot of that thought to be sensitive information turned out to be not that interesting at all. Everyone thought the sky would fall if those cables came out and they were published. Oh my God, the whole world would end. And it turned out that they were really just kind of boring diplomatic cables. And even if you look at the Kennedy files that have been declassified over the last 40 years, I take a look at that sometimes about like the most recently declassified stuff, and it's all very boring shit. So like it's the big secret is maybe there's an asset that we have that we don't want the adversary to know about that asset. But ultimately, I question this idea that these decryption tools would actually even be that valuable 20 or 30 years from now. I'll shut up now. Curious what you think.
So there's a lot of things there. I'm just going to start with the easier ones. In my time in Congress, the amount of classified briefings I had were numerous, especially at the brink of October 7th and all of that stuff in Israel, and then also prior to that, the Chinese spy balloon, so on and so forth, right? So I've learned one thing, Martin, and I've said this openly here. Classified is laughable, at least at the clearance level we had as Congress people, right? Maybe there's more interesting stuff at higher levels with the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon, but as far as Congress goes, I can say pretty openly, um, classified stuff is pretty boring. It's not a matter of the type of information. It's not like it's of nuclear catastrophic ramifications. It's more so intelligence that we don't want our adversaries knowing, because then they can premeditate our steps or our way of thinking and so on and so forth. So it's giving too much. The reason something is deemed classified sometimes it's because it gives too much foresight into our positioning on, let's say, an issue, a war, a conflict, whatever, for our enemies, and they can start to forecast, right, movement. That's why classified stuff usually is pretty boring, because it's classified in the nature of, it's not that it's a big deal secret here for us. It's more so from who's, divulging this and dissecting this. So moving past that, as far as quantum computing goes, I've actually done 2 floor speeches on this and touched on this issue. I've argued on a bill in a committee on this as well. Quantum computing is not, it's beyond just decoding and being able to decrypt information. It's about speed. It's about cutting edge. It's about literally decentralizing and, or in some cases, even centralizing technology. It depends on which way you're going to apply this, right? For instance, in the case of the Chinese government that I mentioned earlier, there's enough documentation out there to show, and based on information we received in the House at the time, is that there's use of this to create to fill deficiencies in productivity, even, and for a government to be able to trade more efficiently on the overnight banking, overnight bidding, and with Federal Reserves all across the world, and all of these different aspects and gambits that can solve a lot of efficiency gaps in governments, right? Such as ours, which leads me back to the statement I said. The United States government doesn't generate anything. That's why it relies exclusively on taxation. And because of its reliance on taxation, and there being, quite frank, a limit on how much the American public is going to generate, that's going to generate tax revenue. Hence, we have 36 on our way to $37 trillion of debt. I believe quantum computing applied appropriately outside of the scope just of espionage and decryption can help bridge gaps of inefficiencies within our government. So, going back to your question about the NSA, FBI, and CIA and budgets, I don't know the actual answer that I can give you. I can say that the agencies do not necessarily, the closed agencies that don't have their budgets public and such, like the Pentagon, who also doesn't have a line item budget for everything for national security reasons, such as CIA and NSA, their budgets are not to be confused with FBI. I've said this before. The FBI has a public budget for a reason. They're a law enforcement agency of such with investigative powers. The NSA and the CIA, their scope of work is far beyond just investigative powers. And therefore, in some cases, it's to be argued that their budget is really what they need, not necessarily a set dollar, although there might be like a line item that we determine on for that. So, to answer your question from a CIA NSA side, I think we ought to be pouring billions into quantum computing, and we ought to be recruiting Manhattan-style recruitment, but with guardrails and with advocation of citizenships or whatever the case it takes to get the brightest, sharpest minds from around the world. But hey, you want to come work on this project? Your citizenship is now to the United States. You renounce any other citizenship, and we keep you on a leash. I'm not saying it's slavery or entrapment, but you are subscribing to a super classified, ultra classified project, and these are the guidelines. We're not going to give you the keys to the kingdom so you can run off and give it to Afghanistan or wherever the fuck you come from. So we did that already with the Manhattan Project, and look how much nuclear weaponry we have around the world because of Oppenheimer's technology, right? And the Manhattan Project technology. So back to the deficiencies in quantum, politicians are thick. Remember, the people who would pass funding for this are the same people asking just a few years back, Martin, what is Facebook? Is it a book full of faces? So the problem we have is that we have an overly decaying government making decisions for the future for our generation and beyond that don't seem to understand the basics of technology, let alone understand reliant and sophisticated advanced technology like quantum, like crypto, and AI. So our issue is more than just one, but I hope that gives you the answer you're looking for in a roundabout kind of like avoiding landmines for my sakes before somebody knocks on my door and say, "Oh, Mr. Santos, you overspoke." So I hope that helps give you kind of the vision I'm trying to put here and what actually happens in the back end and in Congress in general.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. I think we do have some disagreements, but I do want to give other people a chance to talk too.
We will
Mary.
always disagree, Martin. But that's
Martin,
what makes healthy discussion. So I appreciate you.
Martin, can I ask about Beth and what he's doing with
Yeah, sure.
thermodynamic
I
computing?
can't speak for him necessarily, but sure.
Yeah, sure. Just like first of all, I just not to blow you up, but I love how you get to, cut through the bullshit. Is there a market there? Can you make money in this market? Does anybody want this product or this tech? And it's so much missing in so much of the conversation. But if you were to steel man what Beth is doing, what? So to my understanding, thermodynamic computing creates a bunch of random numbers. They can use that in training. Okay, great. But beyond that, what is there as a product for him if he does succeed, and maybe what the chances are?
Yeah, I mean, I can't pontificate too much on what he's doing because it's fairly, he hasn't given too many details out. But I do think that non-transistor based computing has been overlooked, whether it's quantum, thermodynamic, or anything else, DNA. We can use nature to compute things, and we did it with transistors. There's no reason. Transistors are very special, but there's no reason there aren't other special things that we can do computation with. And to George's point, there's a lot of things that need computation. I do challenge the idea that, as I spoke about earlier a couple hours ago, what exactly do we need to compute, and why don't our current computers work enough? And I think a lot of this is, there are more human problems with this than anything else. It also questions the scope of government, which is how much does it make sense for government to do basic research? As a science guy, I love the government doing basic research, but also, a lot of that is about just seeing where you go and publishing, and some things not published, of course, and just sort of meandering, and you never know what you'll find. But that's not what business is. When business tried to do this, it worked and it didn't. Bell Labs worked really well in one hand. It didn't make AT&T any money. And AT&T had Bell Labs as almost like a public good. And Google sort of does this as a public good too. And quantum is part of Google's public good. It's not really part of a money-making enterprise for them. So the companies that are trying to be money-making enterprises on quantum, they're sort of quasi-science experiments, and they get funded by kind of people that are really optimistic about the future and have this vision of it. But at the same time, there doesn't, to me, there doesn't appear to be a clear business. And I don't think that means George is wrong, by the way. I think that the government should fund the impossible. They should fund the things that don't make sense for business to fund. Because if business can fund them, that's fine. we have Lockheed and we have, Boeing, and they could do classified research, and that's great. But if there's something where business doesn't make sense to fund because like you're 30 years away from actually getting physical qubits, then government should do it. But should it be stuff that's at a publicly traded for-profit company, or should it be that is wholly dependent on this? To me, that feels a little strange. Like,
Well, Martin, can I just throw something in
yeah,
there? Part of the issue that we are behind is that our public-private partnerships have prioritized being hammers and treating everything as nails instead of innovating. Now, I'm not saying that Boeing and Lockheed aren't innovating, but if you look at their scope of R&D, research and development, versus their scope of production on what's already developed, it's lopsided. I mean, their R&D computes for about 20-25% of all their operations versus producing hammers for nails that are known are more profitable. So these companies look at what they can earn in the right now with a very small sense of projection for the future. All of a sudden, the rush for technology almost seems to have died down as if we've reached a plateau. Remember when it was about the fastest airplane and the biggest airplane? And now I just feel like it's like airplanes. We just mass manufacture them. We put some little nuances to them, but sometimes they glitch and fucking doors blow mid-flight. Like we can't even seem to get to manufacturing airplanes right now that are safe. I mean, they are safe, but I'm just saying without having glitches on them. So I think that there's this lopsided value system also in the public-private sector, which leads me to believe that the government should be doing bids on grants from an entrepreneurial side and, putting people through the ringer to put them and give them classified levels and put them through all the screenings and the background checks and security clearances and all what they have to do and create a race for the moon essentially all over again, like we did in the 1950s. So I think this would be very smart for the government to come in and say, hey, we have a ton of R&D, we want to have new tech, we want to have advancements, and we don't want the same old tired players who seem to be sitting pretty and
yeah,
resting their
no,
laurels.
that makes a ton of sense. But I think we're too early. So one of the things in quantum is this idea of Shor's algorithm, which is you can factor big numbers more easily. And the problem is I've spent the last several months programming quantum computers to do this, and they haven't been able to really do it. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying. And the question is, like, does it make sense for us to spend, or does it make sense even for a company? Forget the government. Does it make sense for a company, like one of these publicly traded companies, and a full disclosure, I'm a short seller of all these companies, while I still also love quantum computing, does it make sense for one of these companies for their job to be that the government is going to pay them money to potentially, hopefully, factor numbers? To me, that seems like a really weird business model. I'm getting paid by the government, and I'm giving them something they want. I'm a contractor. Now, Boeing's a contractor. But the thing I'm delivering isn't useful. Boeing delivers useful things. They're, very important for warfare. But the quantum computing I'm delivering is a bridge. It might be a bridge to nowhere. It might be a bridge to something useful. But should these companies be subsisting on government funds for the next 20 years? There's no practical industrial application that we can see. We discussed this at length. And that could change. It probably will change. But as of now, there's no utility. So this has happened before, where AI had two big winters, where government was the only funder of AI, and government gave up on AI twice, including industry. Industry often follows government in academia as well. And so, you have these boom and bust cycles. There was a big boom cycle in the 80s called expert systems. And then there was a big bust when companies tried to implement and didn't do what was promised, and they give up. Obviously, AI is hot again, and it seems really awesome. And it's going to help the economy and the budget and all that way more than quantum. Quantum's time could be 2040 or 2050 or 2060. And Jensen Huang came out the other day and said we're at least 15 years away and probably closer to 30 years away, which is in my opinion, true. So let academics do this. Academics can do this work. They can get funding from NIH or whatever it is, maybe not NIH, DARPA or someone like that. And they can, as academics get it closer to reality, then we can get there. Because to me, this is like talking about a really out there kind of concept, like, I don't know, cold fusion or space travel or something like that. It's a little, in my opinion, it's a little far fetched. And certainly the stock market has gotten ahead of itself. The government side is sort of a totally different scope, right? The government has a lot of different scopes that we as stock traders don't necessarily understand or can appreciate. So what the government should be doing is one thing, but the public traded stocks, it's hard for me to imagine them sort of subsisting on this for the next 20 or 30 years, hopefully one day being able to deliver a useful product. Anyway, I want Sebastian, who's been waiting patiently, to say his piece.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I just want to add a couple things. Since George started speaking, I think the best example for quantum is like, imagine if SpaceX was in the 60s to get us to the moon. It's like, and there wasn't the Cold War. It's like, would there really have been the strong profit incentive where it's like, okay, we get to the moon. All right, now what? We're going to mine some moon rocks? Like, how do you make money off of this? I think it was better for government to have done it because it's like, okay, we have to beat the Soviets. All right, there's the tax, spend demands, the intellectual capital. Okay, there. We don't, like, it's there for quantum, but it's like, yeah, I do think the government on some level should at least be invested in it, but it's not to the point. Okay, like George is saying, China's developing it, right? So where is China getting with it? I mean, we don't know. It's nothing really tangible yet, but it could be soon. So, but that's, again, it's something out there. It's something that's going to take maybe 20, 30 years. So I think it's almost better to approach this from, like you said, the academic, the government perspective than it is from the, the market perspective.
Yeah, you can't make a business on this. I mean, if you try,
Yeah, right, Martin?
any
You can't
any
yet.
any recession that comes along blows you up, because you ultimately need investors to say, I will pay for this. And investors, as of now, these companies have not been able to get the government to pay for it meaningfully, and they've gotten contracts. But investors have to be able to pony up the money, and investors know government, as you said, can be fickle. They can Doge can decide tomorrow, nope, we're not paying for this, or they could decide we're 10xing the budget. We just don't know. Investors, when there's a recession, budgets get cut. Even government takes a step back and says maybe we should cut back on spending. And a lot of the budget, as you know, is fixed. In Medicare, Medicaid, and NASA, even NASA's budget gets cut. So there's ultimately only so much money to dole out, and you have people like Vivek and Trump and Musk saying we're going to cut this freaking budget to zero. And I think that if you're a fan of quantum, well, that's a problem, because the
Yeah,
only customers of stuff is government.
Yeah, because it's like you have to produce results. Like, what did you do today? It's like
Right.
that's a trouble to do for quantum. And obviously, if, like, I'm not doubting that China could have something like that, but they would definitely show it off, like the Soviets showed off Sputnik, to
And
say,
they've
look, we
published.
put it there.
Well,
They've
remember
published.
one thing, though, but you're dealing with Elon Musk, who this is very much in his realm, and he's a visionary, right? This is a guy who built SpaceX, and he's taking us to Mars. So I find his application of Doge more so geared towards. I'll give an example. Hundreds of reports that are ordered from Congress annually, some from
Sure.
dead senators, by the way, seriously, that are still funded, that nobody reads and cost millions of dollars. That the level of cuts are not on
But
actual.
I would argue that funding a quantum computer that can barely divide 77 into 11 and 7 is also a boondoggle.
That gets me into my second point really quick, which is like, okay, if we want to really let quantum computing take off, it has to first be able to solve everything classical. Okay, before we even get to
Well,
the
I
quantum
don't know about that.
space.
I would say that it has to solve one thing really well.
Yeah,
It
well,
doesn't have to solve
obviously,
everything.
well, yeah, but for it to be like as publicly accepted, it's like it has to
Well,
be reliable.
GPUs don't run Windows. They don't run, right, but they're useful for a certain narrow application. And I think it's okay to have a new class of computers that is really good at decryption or really good at Grover's algorithm, which we haven't talked about today, which is kind of the search algorithm. Um, it's fine. I mean, it's okay. So anyway, I'm just trying to. I'll let you speak, but I just wanted to give you my thoughts.
Because that gets me into my next point, which is like, okay, these are the classical problems that we understand today. There's obviously going to be problems that show up in the future that are like, okay, these are quantum specific problems because it comes from.
So I don't know about that because it's sort of like there's this joke that my girlfriend and I and the whole EAC and teapot community kind of do sometimes. The jobs of the future, and one of the jobs of the future is boson cutter. Another job is like tachyon, rift dweller or something like that.
Well,
and
yeah, but
like the quantum mechanical skill, okay, is just not something humans have to deal with ever.
Hold on, real quick, Martin, as a devil's advocate here, and I know I'm stretching here, so Sebastian, indulge me. With all this talk of space travel and all those big numbers in computing that we will be facing down, is it not fair to say that if Elon has his way
I mean,
on Mars, there's going to be a shit ton of massive math?
50 or 100 years from now totally makes sense. Like, we may actually be working in that quantum realm more often, but I feel like this is such science fiction, and I'm a science fiction guy. Like, this is what I like. And for me, it's like, what role do we as investors in the publicly traded markets, to government, from your perspective, Mr. Santos, and others, what role does science fiction play in our lives? And of course, we've learned over 100 or even 1,000 years that science fiction can often turn into science fact.
I mean, I don't know. Ask Steven Spielberg. He seems to know a thing or two.
Yeah, over time, these inventions become real, and they're exciting, and they're what keep people alive. They're what keep people's hearts going. And it's been well documented that the race to the moon was not just flying to some rock. It was a way more than that. And I do think that's why I even care about this space. The race to factor a really big number, it actually means a lot to me. I can feel it in my bones. It's a really big deal to anyone who's a really super nerd. But again, where's the business? Why is the stock trading like it is? I can start a quantum computing company tomorrow that does everything Rigetti and IonQ do, but it's not worth 10 billion. Science experiments. Again, human genome sciences that decoded the genome. Back when George was in elementary school, these guys were trading for 10 billion, and they ended up trading for 1 billion after people realized decoding the human genome was not actually that important of a step as they thought. We had genetics before that, by the way. And, sequencing genomes cheaply was something that was important, but that company didn't end up doing that. So these quantum pioneers, which I really think IBM and Google are the pioneers, and those companies are equipped to work with government because the small companies like Rigetti and IonQ, they need PR to survive. And they need to actually say, hey, we did this for NSA. Google and IBM don't need quantum to survive, but they could do that and keep it quiet and say, yeah, we've quietly been working for NSA over the last 10 years, and nobody needs to know that we've been doing that. Whereas I think IonQ is like, no, this is our only customers right now of IonQ is the Air Force Research Lab, which, again, I don't know who they have on payroll to have gotten them that contract, but they're not getting DoD, they're not getting Pentagon, they're not getting NSA, or CIA, or anybody else. They're getting Air Force. And again, I don't know what it means exactly, but it's not a big contract. And ultimately, I think Air Force is going to say, and it could be simply the changeover of some Air Force guy or a changeover of the Trump administration or the next administration. But eventually, somebody at Air Force is going to say, yeah, we don't really need quantum that bad. Let's wait. Let's give this a couple years, stop wasting money on this, because what actually have they delivered? And if you're IonQ, you'll give a presentation once a year to the Air Force people and say, well, this year we've been able to have a 100 qubit machine. And last year it was like 35 qubits. And the next year maybe they'll have 400 qubits. But we need millions of qubits to actually calculate anything. And again, I've shed questions as to what exactly can these machines calculate that we can't calculate without them. For example, we learned about Chinese hacks recently. They didn't need quantum computing to hack our systems. They have traditional spies that walk right in. They've got old school hackers. They've got new school hackers. They've got all kinds of stuff for us to share and steal information. And of course, from a patriotic perspective, I don't want them doing that, and I want us to protect our information. But at the same time, again, I point to the WikiLeaks debacle where when the WikiLeaks cables were announced that, they're going to release all these diplomatic cables, they actually made it suspenseful. They said they're going to do it tomorrow. I got all the popcorn I could find, and I said, oh man, I can't wait to read these leaks. Imagine what they're going to have in them. And it was a big nothing burger. People said, the Russians make fun of the Americans call the Russians a bunch of drunks, the Chinese laugh at both of them. And there was nothing there that was actually secret or interesting. And, part of the reason is the world's a lot less, I think, mysterious than people give it credit for. And espionage is important, but it's not, something that I think necessarily the government is going to break the bank and say, we need to spend $100 billion on espionage tomorrow. I do think we need basic research, and quantum mechanics is something that is still fascinating, still hard to, learn about. But there's other areas like energy, fusion and things like that. Fusion could solve a lot of energy problems. That's a competing thing we need to invest in. Quantum, like I said, I love it, so there's nothing I have against it. But Alzheimer's is something we need to invest a lot of money into. It's a serious medical threat. Future pandemics, possibly. Other types of advanced technologies that our government should be funding because industry sort of can't fund them because their purview is too distant. So it's not just quantum computing. So I think the government's going to be measured and smart about, not dunking the whole budget into one thing that may or may not be even relevant. But if you could tell me today, based on this algorithm, this is exactly what quantum computing can do, and it'll put us, in matter teleportation or free energy or something like that. It'd be nice to have free energy. But that's not the promise of quantum computing yet. We just don't know where it's going to lead.
Unless
right now,
you had
it's about dividing numbers.
Chinese is the boogeyman, like the Soviets were, because then it's like, you put the fear in everybody that they're gonna,
And it's not a bad catalyst. It's not a bad catalyst.
Exactly, that would be the catalyst. It wouldn't be, I'm gonna 50x my investment because this is the next Nvidia.
It's
that's
what the Chinese or whichever geopolitical adversary is doing,
or whatever.
That's kind of the crux of how the government spends its money.
And China publishes nonstop in Nature and an archive, and it's super impressive. And as an American, I clench my fist and say, why are China's doing they did the first quantum secure network. Wow. Why didn't we do that?
Exactly,
and, it's an impressive feat. You've tamed the universe to your will. That's incredible. And it was Chinese researchers. Now, they may be lying. They may have done it. They may not have done it. We don't know. But the point is, it's future technology, and the mark of a civilization is how advanced is its technology. And we look at, other countries that could barely filter their water. Their oxygen is diluted with all kinds of terrible emissions, like India. And we say, what can you do that nobody can do? Now, America's been the leader in every field ever. And to George's point, there is one field that China seems to, and again, we don't know for sure, but they seem to be racing ahead, which is quantum. Now, again, maybe China's got this really big interest in reading our shit, and they do seem to love their espionage. And so they really want to learn all of American communications and secrets. Fine. Well, ultimately, our interest in this is much more, I think, national defense than it is, necessarily learning somebody else's secrets. And we don't want another 9/11 to ever happen. We don't want another attack on American soil, and it's something we should protect for. But ultimately, we have bigger fish to fry than just encryption, decryption. I think AI, can save our country's entire budget. I think, other advanced technologies can, like energy side, could be really important in the way, we take care of our planet and take care of certain expenses. So, there's a lot to do. And I think quantum is just a small piece of this pie. And it's again, this call is about these stocks. it's not necessarily about quantum computing writ large. It's about, are these stocks good buys or not? And I think the answer is conclusively no. Nevertheless, it's still an interesting field. Again, I'm fascinated by this field for a reason. It's an awesome field. But I wouldn't touch the stocks with a 10-foot pole. I would even encourage you to bet against them, not because I'm a bad guy or an evil or vengeful guy, but because that's probably going to make you money. And if you're buying these stocks, rushing into this thinking you're getting to the next gold rush, I think you're going to be surprised that these companies will actually not have accomplished very much a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. If anything, the upside might come from an IBM or a Google or another privately held company that's being funded by Eric Schmidt or someone like that. These publicly traded companies are the dogs that could not find private funding, and they were forced to go public through SPACs. That's the Kamath thing, and that many of you know. SPACs existed before Kamath, by the way. But, these were not the pick of the litter. The pick of the litter was already, these are the orphans. These are the runts. I look at my cat, Nibbles, who's the runt of the litter. And I still love Nibbles, but these aren't stocks you should love. So anyway, that's my piece on that. I'm going to probably get to bed soon unless anybody wants their
I
last.
just wanted to say I'm off to bed, but thanks for the space. Thanks for the mind. Great
Yeah, thank
discussion.
you for
Long time
coming.
to talk.
Any last?
Yeah, don't be a stranger. Don't disappear
I
on me.
won't.
All right, talk to you.
You can't imagine. Yeah, thank you,
You
George.
bet.
I'm just so busy lately. It's insane. I haven't had any time for anything. Any last thoughts from anyone?
One last thing.
Martin, can I ask one
Yeah, let
last
Mario
quick one?
go.
What do you think is underfunded right now, if anything?
Alzheimer's. Yeah, Alzheimer's is going to
Yeah.
destroy our civilization. We're going to be old, tottering, demented people unless we actually solve this problem. And cassava was a stock that I shorted very famously. And people were saying, Martin, don't you want to have a drug for Alzheimer's for your family or for yourself? Of course I do. But cassava didn't help that. It hurt that. Funding bad ideas doesn't help the good ideas, or it doesn't help attract new capital. It doesn't mean anything. So Alzheimer's is something where drug companies have a hard time tackling it because it's a 20, 30, 40-year disease, and a patent lasts 17 years. Your patents expire. So it's hard for a drug company.
What do you think the odds are we'll have something good in the next 10 years on Alzheimer's?
I hope so, but ultimately, it's a government job because Pfizer can't invest in a 30-year clinical trial. It doesn't make sense. They'll never get their money back. The patent will expire before the trial even comes out. And if you want to do a 20, 30-year trial, because Alzheimer's is this very weird disease that starts in your 40s and only manifests clinically, like in your 60s or 70s, where it's thought to be too late. It's too late for Alzheimer's to intervene in Alzheimer's when you're 70. So anyway, that's one thing that I think is underfunded. Energy is another thing where if you want to really tame the universe to your will, energy is the place to do it. Energy is we have this, many billions of dollars, where we need to, many trillions of dollars where we spend money. And I think that there's, a lot of, just gaps there where, we could potentially really get energy to a place where it's cheaper and more, just a lot, sort of better position. Sorry, my cats are fighting here, so I'm a little distracted. So I think that's a place where, getting fusion to work or something like that, nuclear, those are places where we can invest. Quantum's just a little too out there, I think. It's like saying we want to invest in space travel or something like that, or like teleportation or something nonsensical. It's just too sci-fi. Okay, any last thoughts?
Zach, Martin, is it the best idea to touch ivermectin since you spoke about cassava?
There's not much to say on ivermectin other than it doesn't work, and I
do agree.
I almost bought ivermectin from Merck years ago, and Merck refused to sell it because they said it had like this heritage to Merck, which it did. They even had a statue of, a guy who was involved in ivermectin in their headquarters. So they didn't want to part with it. And eventually the drug went generic. In fact, it was my friend's company that made the first and only generic for ivermectin. And so it wouldn't have been a great acquisition for me anyway. But I know the drug really, really well. And I think just like quantum is not about quantum is about gambling, so too ivermectin isn't about medicine. ivermectin is really about the distrust of authority. So ivermectin stands as a metaphorical symbol for people distrusting Dr. Fauci, U.S. government, all this stuff. Trust of government is at an all-time low. So if you want to be a rebel, what do you say? Well, I don't trust this system. I'm going to trust this thing I heard about that's against this system. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. I just don't like it. It kind of reminds me when you're 6 years old and you're fighting some kid in kindergarten and they say, well, I like this. And you say, well, I hate that. And they say something like, I like bubblegum. And you say, I hate bubblegum. It's stupid. And you know in your heart of hearts that you love bubblegum. But you just disagree with the guy because you're in a fight. And I think that is kind of what's happening here with ivermectin. I don't think anybody actually sits there and says this is a cure for cancer. I think people are sitting there saying, well, I really don't trust my doctor. I hate pharmaceutical companies. I hate HMOs. I hate PBMs. I hate all the bullshit around medicine. So, I am willing to just disagree with the system just to piss the system off or just to show that people are upset with the system. There's a guy that killed somebody over this recently. So believing in ivermectin is a very small protest relative to the huge protest of what happened with the UNH CEO. So I feel like, this is more about, this is a functional impact of the functional manifestation of that distrust. And it's a willingness to be idiotic. It's a willingness to be irrational for the sake of making a statement. And I think, again, the guy who conducted a terrible act was willing to do that too. It was very irrational. This guy is not changing a thing by murdering somebody. All he's doing is getting life in prison. He's not sending a message to anybody. People just think it's a heinous thing that he's done. Some crazy people think it's a good thing. But in essence, it's extremely irrational to go kill somebody to make a political statement. Nevertheless, he did it. And, so appreciating ivermectin, which is a great drug for certain infectious diseases, as a potential drug for other diseases is, again, it was thought to be drug for COVID. Well, COVID went away, so COVID doesn't matter anymore. So we need to, well now it works for cancer. And it's so stupid. And of course, there are some preclinical work that may suggest that, it could be interesting to look at in cancer, but it's so far, there's about 80 million compounds that have lab bench work that make them interesting for cancer. That doesn't make them cancer drugs. That makes them cancer candidate drugs. And again, there's 80 million of them. Pick a random article in PubMed. You will stumble upon a drug that might be a cancer cure. It does not make it a cancer cure. So,
Martin, I 100% agree with what you're saying. But do you know how many clinical trials is ongoing now in US investigating ivermectin and anti-cancer activity based on clinicaltrial.org?
No, how many?
Only one trial. And the most interesting part that Mel Gibson said he has 3 friends, all had stage 4 cancer, and now they are cancer-free, right? Yeah. And it turned out that Mel Gibson lived in Los Angeles. This clinical trial is in Los Angeles, in Cedar Sinai Medical Center. And Mel Gibson donated to that Cedar Sinai Medical Center about $5 million a few years ago. It's funny enough. And you know what? The condition to participate in the trial, the treatment condition, is stage 4 cancer, which also ticks the box. And this is a combination of ivermectin and PD-1 inhibitor balstilimab. So it's a combo trial. It's a single arm, open label study conducted by one doctor in that Cedar Sinai clinic. So can he accidentally disclose the trial results? No.
Well, that's fine, but PD-1 is Merck's drug, and ivermectin is off-label, so he can disclose whatever he wants, and the doctors can disclose them. But PD-1 is what's doing the work there.
Right. And it's not Merck's. It's not a Merck. It's by the small biotech company called Agenus, ticker symbol AGEN.
There's 20 companies that have PD-1s. So it's not like they're all the same. It's Coke and Pepsi. Merck has Keytruda. Agenus has their drug. Bristol Myers has Opdivo. Roche has Tecentriq. Everyone has a PD-1 inhibitor. And PD-1 inhibitors are known to be fantastic cancer drugs. They were the first, I would say since 2005, the first really exciting new mechanism for cancer. And that's why Merck has its biggest selling drug is a PD-1 inhibitor. So to me, if you tell me that, diet and exercise, let's say I'm 300 pounds, and then a year later I'm 180 pounds. And people said, wow, what'd you do? And I said, well, I wore this special Yankees hat. And the Yankees hat made me lose weight. And they said, really? What else did you do? I said, well, I think it's all in the Yankees hat, but I also went on Ozempic and dieted and exercised and trained for marathons. I said, Martin, I don't think it's the Yankees hat that lost you 120 pounds. I think it's probably the diet and exercise and the Ozempic you did. I said, no, it's the Yankees hat. So it's kind of retarded because ivermectin doesn't have any known anti-cancer properties, but Keytruda is the freaking cancer cure. So you give
Yes,
Keytruda and
absolutely right.
ivermectin. You shouldn't be that surprised if the cancer goes away.
Right. Keytruda is the best-selling cancer drug of all the time, but like this PD-1 inhibitor from Agenus is like the analog of Keytruda. Yeah, thanks a lot for your comments. Thank you.
Antibody is an antibody, right? So like, there's subtle differences in antibodies, like the FC region and binding affinity and, affinity for other off-target things. But ultimately, it seems to be that all the PD-1 antibodies are basically all the same. But the trial data is what differentiates them. Merck did a really good job of doing clinical trials in almost every cancer, whereas the other companies kind of were slower to do it. So Merck has the most revenue, but there's plenty of revenue from the other PD-1s too, and maybe Agenus will have some as well. But yeah, it's kind of a funny thing that if those patients are just getting ivermectin and their tumor's disappearing, and it's real, I would say, wow, I'm wrong. It's unbelievable. But if they're getting ivermectin and the best known cancer drug at the same time, I think ivermectin is doing absolutely nothing. And the best known cancer drug of all time is what's actually shrinking the tumors. So anyway, time to go. Thank you guys so much. Have a great night. Appreciate it.